The dust tasted like glass when you breathed it. Commander Rachel Sullivan knew that better than most. She had swallowed enough of it in Helmand Province to remember the way it coated your throat, turned your spit to paste, made every breath feel like you were drowning on dry land. That was 3 years ago. The dust was gone now, replaced by California air that smelled like salt and diesel, and the particular kind of sweat that only comes from men pushing their bodies past what nature intended. But the memory stayed sharp. Memory always did when it was mixed with blood. The gate at Naval Special Warfare Center stood exactly where she remembered it. Black iron, government issue, the kind of barrier that said you belonged on one side or the other, and there was no middle ground. Rachel stood on the civilian side, hand trembling just enough that she had to ball it into a fist to make it stop. In her other hand, the medical clearance letter felt heavier than it should. 3 pages of bureaucratic language that all meant the same thing: fit for duty, cleared for instruction, authorized to return. The trembling wasn't fear. Rachel Sullivan had jumped out of perfectly good aircraft at 20,000 feet. She had breached doors in Fallujah not knowing what was on the other side. She had held her little brother while he bled out under a collapsed building and told him he was going to be fine even though they both knew different. Fear was something she understood. This was something else. This was the weight of 18 months compressed into a single moment. 18 months of surgery and physical therapy and nights when the pain meds weren't enough, but you took them anyway because the alternative was worse. 18 months of wondering if the Navy would actually let her come back, or if the medical discharge papers would arrive before the clearance. She stepped through the gate. The grinder spread out before her like a parade ground designed by someone who believed suffering built character. Maybe it did. The concrete shimmered in the afternoon heat, waves of distortion rising off the surface where recruits had been running drills since before dawn. Rachel could see them now, a class of 20 candidates moving through an obstacle course with the kind of exhausted determination that came from knowing the instructors were watching for the first sign of quit. 8 women. 12 men. The first integrated SEAL candidate preparation class in the program's history. Her responsibility if the brass decided she was ready. The operations building sat at the north end of the grinder, squat and functional, the kind of architecture that said the military didn't care about aesthetics, just results. Rachel walked toward it with the careful posture of someone who had learned to hide pain so well it became second nature. 17 steps from the gate to the building entrance. She counted everyone, not because she needed the distraction, but because counting kept you focused. Counting kept you from thinking about the last time you walked this path, when both legs worked the same, and your ribs didn't feel like they were held together with piano wire and hope. Captain Anderson's office smelled like coffee that had been on the burner too long, and the particular mustiness of government furniture that had seen 3 decades of use. Anderson himself sat behind a desk covered in file folders and training schedules, a man in his early 50s with the kind of weathered face you got from 25 years of sun and salt water and responsibility. He looked up when Rachel entered, and something flickered across his expression. Not quite sympathy. Not quite concern. Something in between that said he knew this conversation was going to be harder than either of them wanted. Commander Sullivan, welcome back. Thank you, sir. Anderson gestured to the chair across from his desk. Rachel sat, keeping her spine straight, ignoring the way her left side pulled when she moved. The medical clearance sat on Anderson's desk between them like evidence in a trial neither wanted to have. Your record is impeccable, Anderson said. He didn't pick up the file, he didn't need to. Men like Anderson had a way of knowing everything that mattered without looking at paper. 4 deployments, multiple commendations, first woman to complete advanced SEAL training and return to active instruction after combat injury. He paused, the kind of pause that meant something difficult was coming next. This assignment is complicated. Rachel waited. In the military, you learned early that silence was often the best response when officers were choosing their words carefully. The Integrated Candidate Program, Anderson continued. It's experimental, high visibility. Congress is watching, the media is watching, and some of the old guard. He stopped, reconsidered. Some of the instructors have concerns. About women in the program, or about me specifically, sir? Anderson's jaw tightened slightly. Master Chief Brennan requested a different lead instructor. He was vocal about his objections. The name hit like a fist to the sternum. Rachel kept her face neutral, but Anderson was too good not to see the reaction. You and Brennan have history, Anderson said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir, he served with my brother. Lieutenant Jake Sullivan, killed in action, Helmand Province, 2021. Anderson's voice softened just a fraction. I'm sorry for your loss, Commander. The words were sincere. They always were. People meant well when they offered condolences. But meaning well didn't change the fact that Jake was dead and she was alive, and Cole Brennan blamed her for the difference. Master Chief Brennan is a decorated SEAL with 22 years of service, Anderson said. He's an asset to this program, but if there's a conflict that will impact training effectiveness. There won't be, sir. Rachel met Anderson's eyes directly. Master Chief Brennan and I are both professionals. We can put personal history aside for the mission. Anderson studied her for a long moment, the kind of assessment that came from decades of evaluating whether people meant what they said or just wanted to believe they did. Your brother died doing his duty, Anderson finally said. You're here to do yours. I respect that, Commander, but respect doesn't eliminate complications. Be aware of them. Yes, sir. Anderson stood, which meant the meeting was over. Rachel rose as well, feeling the pull in her ribs again, that constant reminder that some things didn't heal completely no matter how many surgeons worked on them. One more thing, Anderson said as she reached the door. The candidates you'll be training. They're watching to see if this program is real or just political theater. Show them it's real. Rachel nodded and stepped back into the California heat. The grinder was empty now, the candidates dismissed for afternoon chow. The obstacle course stood silent, all the apparatus that turned civilians into warriors waiting for the next round of suffering. Rachel walked the perimeter, letting muscle memory guide her feet while her mind worked through everything Anderson hadn't said out loud. Cole Brennan didn't just have concerns. Cole Brennan had objections, strong enough to request she be removed before she even started. That wasn't professional disagreement, that was personal. The last time Rachel had seen Cole Brennan, they were both covered in dust and blood. She was dragging him out from under 200 pounds of concrete while Jake's hand disappeared into the rubble behind them. Cole had been screaming Jake's name. She had been screaming too, but her voice was lost in the sound of the building collapsing. That terrible grinding roar that meant tons of steel and stone were rearranging themselves into new and deadly configurations. She got Cole out. She went back for Jake, but physics doesn't care about love or duty or the desperate bargains you make with God when you're digging through wreckage with your bare hands. Jake was already gone by the time she reached him. Cole knew it. She knew it, but knowing didn't make the guilt any lighter. Didn't think you'd have the guts to come back. The voice came from behind her, rough-edged and familiar in the worst way. Rachel turned slowly, giving herself time to compose her expression into something neutral. Master Chief Cole Brennan stood 20 feet away, arms crossed over a chest that looked like it had been carved from the same concrete as the grinder. He was bigger than she remembered, or maybe she had just gotten smaller. 18 months of hospital beds and physical therapy had a way of reducing you. His face was harder too, more lines around the eyes, more gray in the stubble on his jaw. The The seal trident tattooed on his left forearm was new. So was the name underneath it, rendered in precise black script, Jake. "Master Chief," Rachel said. Her voice came out level. "That was something." "Didn't think you'd still be here," she added. It was safer than saying what she actually thought, which was that Cole looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 3. "Someone has to maintain standards." Cole's tone suggested that someone definitely wasn't her. "Can't just lower the bar to fill quotas. Standards are what I'm here to uphold." "Standards?" Cole moved closer, and Rachel saw something in his eyes that went beyond professional disagreement, something raw and unhealed. "Jake upheld standards. Jake's dead. You're not." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Rachel could have responded, could have said that survivor's guilt was a luxury you couldn't afford in combat, or that Jake made his own choices, or any of the other things therapists taught you to say when people blamed you for living. But Cole wasn't looking for a response. He was looking for a fight, and fights required 2 participants. "I have work to do, Master Chief." Rachel turned away, presenting her back with the kind of deliberate calm that said this conversation was over. "So did Jake," Cole said to her retreating form, "right up until your weakness got him killed." Rachel kept walking, 17 steps to the operations building. She counted everyone. The candidates were assembled in classroom B when Rachel entered, 20 bodies in various states of attention, ranging from rigid focus to barely controlled exhaustion. This late in the afternoon, after 6 hours of physical training, even the strongest started to show the wear. Rachel moved to the front of the room and set her clipboard on the instructor's desk with a sound like a gavel. "I'm Commander Sullivan, combat conditioning instructor." She let her eyes move across the room, cataloging faces and postures, and the subtle tells that separated the ones who might make it from the ones who were already mentally packing their bags. "Some of you know who I am. Some of you think you know. What matters is what you'll learn here, not what you heard before you arrived." A hand went up in the 3rd row. Female candidate, compact build, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. The name tape on her uniform said Tours. "Ma'am, is it true you're the first female SEAL to return to instruction after combat injury?" Rachel recognized the question for what it was, not curiosity, a test, to see if the instructor would embrace the label or deflect it. "Yes, petty officer." "Then you're exactly who should be teaching us, ma'am." A ripple went through the room, candidates reacting to Tor's boldness. Rachel filed the name away. This one had steel in her spine. That was useful. "What I am," Rachel said, "is an instructor with 12 years of service and 4 combat deployments. What you are is candidates who need to learn how to survive in environments where weakness gets people killed." She paused. "My job is to teach you the difference between pushing your limits and breaking yourselves. Your job is to learn it before someone dies finding out." The room went quiet, not the nervous quiet of people afraid they'd said something wrong. The focused quiet of people who realized the person standing in front of them had earned the right to speak. "Tomorrow, 500 hours full kit. We'll see what you're made of." She dismissed them with a gesture and watched them file out, all except Tors, who lingered by the door like she had something to say but wasn't sure of the protocol. "Something on your mind, petty officer?" Tors straightened. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted." Master Chief Brennan was talking to some of the candidates earlier about standards, about how the program is being watered down. Tors hesitated. "Some of the women are worried they're only here because of politics, not because they earned it." Rachel studied the young woman in front of her. Tors couldn't be more than 23, 24. Young enough to still believe that hard work and determination were always enough. old enough to have started learning they weren't. Did Master Chief Brennan say that specifically? Not in those words, ma'am, but the implication was clear. Rachel nodded slowly. Here's what you need to understand, Tors. Every SEAL candidate, male or female, faces doubt, from others and from themselves. The question isn't whether people doubt you. The question is whether you let that doubt change your performance. Yes, ma'am. Master Chief Brennan is a decorated warrior with more combat experience than most of this base combined. He's also human. Humans carry baggage. Your job isn't to prove yourself to him. It's to meet the standards, period. Tors absorbed this, processing. And if the standards are being applied differently, then you document it and report it through proper channels, but you don't assume malice before you have evidence. Clear. Clear, ma'am. After Tors left, Rachel stood alone in the empty classroom and let herself feel the exhaustion she'd been holding back all day. Her ribs ached with the kind of deep, grinding pain that said the titanium plates were doing their job, but her body resented them for it. She should go to medical, should get the routine check that was supposed to happen on her first day back, should let Doc Palmer verify that everything was healing according to plan. Instead, she walked. The medical building sat on the eastern edge of the base, a low structure that looked more like an office complex than a hospital. Rachel found Doc Palmer in his office, reviewing X-rays on a light board that made the bones look like abstract art rendered in shades of white and gray. "Commander," Palmer looked up, unsurprised. He was in his late 40s, with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen enough injuries to know which ones were worth panicking over. "I was wondering when you'd show up. Figured I should make it official." Palmer gestured to the exam table. Rachel sat, suppressing a wince as her ribs protested the movement. Palmer's examination was efficient and thorough, hands pressing against her left side with the kind of clinical detachment that came from years of practice. "How's the pain level?" "Manageable." "On a scale of 1 to 10. Rachel hesitated. Lying to medical personnel was technically a violation of regulations, but regulations were written by people who had never had to choose between their career and complete honesty. 4. Palmer's expression said he knew she was lying but wasn't going to push it. Not yet. He moved to the light board and pulled up new X-rays, images of Rachel's ribcage that looked like someone had tried to rebuild a demolished building with metal scaffolding. "The titanium plates are holding well," Palmer said. "No signs of rejection. The fractures have healed cleanly." He paused in that way doctors had when they were about to deliver news you wouldn't like. "But there's stress fracturing around the attachment points. Hairline, barely visible, but it's there." Rachel leaned forward to study the images. She could see what Palmer meant, thin, dark lines radiating from where the plates connected to bone. "What does that mean for my clearance?" "It means you're cleared for duty as long as you avoid significant impact to that area. A fall, a hard collision, direct trauma." Palmer turned from the light board to face her directly. "Commander, those plates are holding your ribs together, but they're also creating stress points. One good hit in the wrong place and we're looking at catastrophic failure." "Define catastrophic." "Punctured lung, internal bleeding, death if you're not in a medical facility when it happens." The words should have been frightening. Maybe they would have been if Rachel hadn't already died a dozen times in her head during the 18 months of recovery. You could only fear your own mortality so many times before it started to feel like an old acquaintance you were tired of visiting. "I'll be careful." Palmer pulled a form from his desk and set it in front of her. Medical waiver. The kind that said you acknowledged the risks and accepted them anyway. You don't have to sign this, Palmer said. You could take an administrative position, training development, curriculum design, you'd still be serving. But I wouldn't be instructing. No, you wouldn't. Rachel picked up the pen and signed her name with the kind of decisive strokes that didn't allow for second guessing. Palmer witnessed the signature without comment, but his eyes said he understood. This wasn't about bravery or dedication or any of the noble reasons people usually gave for risking their lives. This was about unfinished business. This was about proving something to someone who would never believe it no matter what she did. Why are you really here, Commander? The question caught her off guard, not because it was invasive, but because it was perceptive. 20 women are watching to see if we quit when it gets hard, Rachel said. If I walk away now, I'm telling them the system wins. That injury means the end, that there's no coming back from being broken. And if you die trying to prove them wrong, then at least I died trying. Palmer filed the waiver without further argument. He'd been in the military long enough to know when someone's mind was made up. Rachel left medical as the sun was starting its descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of fire. The base was quieter now, most personnel at evening chow or in their quarters. She should eat, should rest, should prepare for tomorrow's training session. But her feet carried her back to the grinder, back to the obstacle course where she'd spent countless hours before Hellman changed everything. The log pit was exactly where she remembered it. 20 telephone poles laid out in a configuration designed to teach teamwork and pain tolerance in equal measure. Candidates lifted the logs as a team, held them overhead, carried them across the course while instructors shouted corrections and insults and occasional encouragement. Rachel had run this course 100 times before her deployment. Jake had run it with her on the weekends when he was home from his own training. They'd made it a competition, racing each other through the obstacles, keeping score, trash-talking with the easy familiarity of siblings who knew each other's weaknesses and strengths. Jake always won, not because he was stronger or faster, but because he never gave up. Even when his muscles were screaming and his lungs felt like they were full of broken glass, he kept moving. That's what made him a good SEAL. That's what got him killed. Mick could complete this course in half your time. Rachel spun. Cole Brennan stood at the edge of the pit, arms crossed, silhouetted against the dying light. She hadn't heard him approach, which meant he'd wanted to be heard when he spoke. Tactical choice. Everything Cole did was tactical. Every single time, Cole continued. He had the record for 3 years straight, you know that. Rachel did know that. Jake's name was still on the record board in the operations building. His time, 14 minutes, 32 seconds. Hers was 17 minutes even, 3.5 minutes slower than her little brother, and those 3.5 minutes felt like a lifetime. Jake was faster, Rachel said. I never disputed that. Jake was better. Cole moved closer, and Rachel saw that he wasn't just making conversation. He was building to something. Stronger, tougher, more committed, everything a SEAL should be. Jake was my brother. You don't need to tell me what he was. Then let me tell you what he wasn't. Cole's voice dropped, became something harder. He wasn't weak. He wasn't soft. And he didn't need 18 months to recover from an injury because he knew how to avoid getting injured in the first place. The implication landed like a physical blow. Rachel felt her jaw tighten, felt the old anger starting to rise. But anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not here. Not with Cole looking for any excuse to prove she didn't belong. I have work to do, Master Chief. She turned to leave. Cole's next word stopped her. So did Jake, right up until your ribs got him killed. Rachel didn't turn around, didn't give Cole the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. She just kept walking, counting steps again, using numbers to keep the rage from becoming something visible. Behind her, Cole's voice followed. You should think about him every time you take a breath, because every breath you take is one he doesn't get. 23 steps to the operations building. Rachel counted every one. Her quarters were small and functional, the kind of space the military provided when they wanted you housed but not comfortable. A bed, a desk, a footlocker, a window that looked out over the grinder. Rachel sat at the desk and opened her laptop, pulling up the files she'd been avoiding since she got her clearance. Training protocols, instructor evaluation procedures, the bureaucratic architecture that held the military together. There was something in the regulations about stress evaluations. Rachel had seen it months ago, during one of the long afternoons when she was supposed to be resting, but couldn't stop her mind from working. A provision that allowed any instructor to request assessment of another instructor's operational readiness if there were concerns about judgment or candidate safety. She pulled up the regulation now, reading through the dense legal language. There it was. Section 47B, Instructor Operational Assessment Protocol, rarely used, but legitimate. The protocol required a controlled environment, defined parameters, proper safety measures, and an evaluation scenario designed by the requesting instructor. Rachel opened a new document and began typing. Range 47, Night Operations, Navigation and Judgment Assessment Under Stress. The words came easily once she started. This wasn't revenge. Revenge was emotional. This was tactical. This was using the system the way it was designed to be used. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. Rachel closed the laptop and opened the door to find her father standing in the corridor, still in civilian clothes from the drive up from San Diego. Rear Admiral Thomas Sullivan, retired, looked older than the last time she'd seen him. More lines around the eyes, more gray in the hair. The weight of losing a son would do that. Dad. Storm. He still used her call sign, the nickname that had followed her from Bud's training through 4 deployments. Thought I'd stop by, see how the first day went. Rachel stepped aside to let him enter. The room felt smaller with both of them in it, the walls pressing closer. Thomas Sullivan had a way of filling whatever space he occupied, not with physical size but with presence. 30 years in the Navy built that kind of gravity. It went fine. Fine, Thomas repeated the word like he was tasting it, finding it inadequate. You look like hell, sweetheart. Good to see you too, Dad. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the darkening grinder. I spoke with Anderson. He said Cole Brennan requested a different instructor. Of course he had. Thomas Sullivan didn't drive 3 hours from San Diego just to drop by. He came because he was worried, and when Thomas Sullivan was worried, he called in favors and gathered intelligence. Cole and I have history. We can work through it. Can you? Thomas turned from the window. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're walking into a situation that could end your career before it restarts. Cole lost his best friend. He needs someone to blame. I'm convenient. You're more than convenient. You're his target. Thomas's voice carried the weight of command, the tone that said he wasn't asking for her opinion, he was stating facts. I pulled strings to get you this position. Don't make me regret it. The words hit harder than they should have. Rachel felt something in her chest tighten, that old, familiar feeling of never being quite good enough for her father's standards. I earned this position. Did you, or did I earn it for you by calling in 30 years of favors? That's not fair. Fair, Thomas's expression hardened. You want to talk about fair, Jake's in the ground, you're here playing instructor. Where's the fairness in that? The room went silent. The the kind of silence that felt like all the air had been sucked out through the window. Rachel stared at her father, seeing the grief that he'd been carrying for 3 years, the guilt that had turned into blame, that had turned into this moment where he finally said out loud what they'd both been thinking. "Jake chose to take that patrol," Rachel said quietly. "I didn't ask him to." "You didn't have to ask. Your ribs were bothering you, he knew it, so he took the rotation to give you rest." Thomas's voice cracked slightly. "He died covering for your weakness." There it was, the truth that had been living between them since Helmand. Not that Jake was dead. They both knew that. But that Jake died because Rachel wasn't strong enough to do her own job. "Get out." Thomas blinked. "What?" "Get out of my quarters, sir." Rachel added the rank designation with enough edge to make it clear she wasn't asking as a daughter. She was ordering as an officer. Thomas studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite regret, not quite recognition, something in between. "Jake believed in you," he finally said, "even when I had doubts, maybe especially when I had doubts." He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "Don't prove me right, Storm, prove him right." After he left, Rachel sat on her bunk and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back all day. The pain in her ribs, the exhaustion in her bones, the weight of carrying Jake's death like a stone in her chest that never got lighter no matter how much time passed. She pulled out the photograph she kept in her footlocker. Her, Jake, and their father, taken 6 years ago at Jake's Bud's graduation. 3 Sullivans in dress whites, 3 generations of service, 3 people who thought they knew what sacrifice meant before they learned the hard way. Jake was smiling in the photo. He was always smiling. Even in Helmand, covered in dust and blood, he tried to smile when she reached him in the rubble, tried to tell her it would be okay, tried to be brave right up until the moment his eyes went empty and she was holding a body instead of a brother. Rachel set the photo aside and returned to her laptop. The training evaluation request was still there, half finished. She read what she'd written, then kept typing. By the time she finished, it was nearly midnight and the base was silent except for the distant sound of ocean waves against the shore. Range 47, Night Operations Assessment, Master Chief Cole Brennan, Evaluation of Judgment Under Stress. She saved the file. Tomorrow she'd submit it. Tomorrow she'd start the process that would either prove her right or destroy what was left of her career. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of weakness. She picked up Jake's photo again and whispered to the image of her brother. "I know you'd tell me to let it go. I know you'd say Cole is just grieving. But I can't, Jake. He needs to see what you saw in me. And I need to prove you weren't wrong to die taking my place." The grinder was empty when Rachel went for her midnight run. She shouldn't have been running at all. Doc Palmer had been clear about avoiding unnecessary strain, but sitting in her quarters thinking about Jake and Cole and her father's disappointment was worse than the risk. She ran the perimeter, boots hitting concrete in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. 2 miles. 3. Enough to make her ribs scream and her breathing come in short gasps. Enough to remind her that pain was just information and information could be managed. On her 4th lap she saw them. 2 figures on the far side of the grinder, silhouetted against the security lights. Cole and another man, younger, talking in low voices that didn't carry across the distance. Rachel slowed, moved into shadow, let her SEAL training guide her into a position where she could hear without being seen. The younger man was Petty Officer Daniel Cross. She recognized him from the candidate files. Former Marine, transferred to Navy for SEAL training, served under Cole in Afghanistan. "Chief, we need to talk about Commander Sullivan." Cross's voice carried uncertainty, the sound of someone who didn't want to have this conversation but felt obligated. Nothing to talk about. Cole's response was flat, emotionless. You hit her with that log this afternoon. On purpose, I saw it. So Cole had already started. Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd expected resistance, expected Cole to be difficult. But actual physical contact on the first day was escalation beyond what she'd anticipated. Accidents happen in training, Cole said. She signed the waiver. This isn't training, this is personal. The silence stretched long enough that Rachel thought Cole might not answer. Then his voice came again, lower now, rower. Damn right it's personal. Rachel heard the pain in those words, heard the 3 years of grief compressed into 4 syllables. Mick and I were brothers, Cole continued. 10 years, Basra, Kandahar, Helmand, I knew him better than his own family. He paused. That day she was supposed to run that patrol, but her ribs were hurting, so Mick took it. Chief, that's not fair. Fair? Cole's laugh was bitter. You want to talk about fair? Mick's in the ground. She gets to play hero. Where's the fairness in that? Mick made his own choice. Mick made a choice to cover for weakness, and now she wants to teach others to be weak, women who don't belong in the teams, standards getting lowered so politicians can feel good about themselves. Cole's voice rose slightly. I won't let it happen, Cross. I won't let her dishonor what Mick died for. Rachel had heard enough. She stepped out of the shadows, making her footsteps audible so they'd know she was there. Both men turned. Cross looked guilty. Cole looked defiant. Gentlemen, Rachel kept her voice neutral. It's after midnight. Suggest you get some rest. Training starts at 500. Cross nodded quickly and left. Cole didn't move. How much did you hear? Enough. Rachel met his eyes. You blame me for Jake's death. That's clear. But bringing it into training, into interactions with candidates, that crosses a line. The only line that matters is the one between qualified and unqualified. Cole moved closer. Jake was qualified. You're not anymore. Those ribs make you a liability. My medical clearance says different. Medical clearance is paperwork. Combat is real. Cole stopped 2 feet away, close enough that Rachel could see the exhaustion in his face, the kind that came from carrying grief like a second skin. You know what really happened that day in Helmand? Rachel's breath caught. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear this. We were on patrol, Compound 17, standard sweep. Cole's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I saw the wire first, the IED tripline. I should have called it, should have stopped Mick, but I froze. The admission hung in the air like smoke. 3 seconds, that's how long I froze, and in those 3 seconds Mick stepped forward. Cole's hands clenched into fists. I killed him, not you, me, but living with that, carrying that, it's easier if I blame you instead. Rachel felt something shift in her understanding. This wasn't about her being weak. This was about Cole not being able to forgive himself. Jake wouldn't want you to carry this, she said quietly. Jake's not here to tell me what he wants. Cole's voice hardened again. You are, and every time I see you, I see the person who lived while my brother died. Then maybe you should look at yourself, because I see the same thing. They stood there in the darkness, 2 warriors carrying the same ghost, unable to set it down because setting it down meant accepting that some things couldn't be fixed. Stay away from my candidates, Cole finally said. Stay away from this program. Go take your administrative position and let the real SEALs do the work. He walked away without waiting for a response. Rachel stood alone on the grinder and made her decision. Tomorrow she would submit the evaluation request. Tomorrow she would set in motion the chain of events that would force Cole to face what he couldn't run from anymore. But tonight she allowed herself one moment of honesty. She whispered into the darkness, knowing no one could hear. "I'm sorry, Jake, for all of it, for not being strong enough, for surviving when you didn't, for what I'm about to do to your best friend." The wind carried her words away toward the ocean. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang the midnight hour. Somewhere in Arlington, a headstone marked Lieutenant Jake Sullivan's grave. And somewhere in the space between memory and present, a brother's ghost watched his sister choose the hard path over the easy one. Rachel walked back to her quarters. She had 4 hours before reveille, 4 hours to sleep if sleep would come. She lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, feeling her ribs ache with every breath, counting inhales and exhales like she'd counted steps earlier. Each breath a reminder, each reminder a choice to keep breathing. Tomorrow would bring pain. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tomorrow would start the sequence that would either prove Cole wrong or destroy them both. But tonight, for just a few hours, Rachel Sullivan allowed herself to be nothing more than a broken warrior, trying to put herself back together with nothing but discipline and determination, and the desperate hope that Jake had been right to believe in her. She closed her eyes and dreamed of dust that tasted like glass. The sun was already cruel by 500 hours. Rachel stood at the edge of the grinder watching 20 candidates assemble in formation, their boots making small sounds against concrete, still warm from yesterday's heat. 2 weeks had passed since her first day back. 2 weeks of watching Cole Brennan circle her classes like a predator looking for weakness. 2 weeks of counting steps between safe spaces and cataloging the ways her ribs protested every movement. Maya Torres stood in the front row, spine straight, eyes forward. The young woman had proven herself in the early training evolutions, pushing through pain with the kind of grim determination that reminded Rachel of herself at that age. Behind Torres, the other 7 female candidates maintained their positions while 12 male candidates filled out the formation. All of them looked tired. That was good. Tired meant they were being pushed. Pushed meant they were learning where their limits lived. Cole emerged from the operations building and moved toward the formation with that particular swagger that came from decades of knowing you belonged somewhere. He carried a clipboard and wore the expression of a man who had already decided this day would be harder than necessary. "Commander Sullivan," Cole's voice carried across the grinder, "mind if I observe today's conditioning circuit?" It wasn't really a question. They both knew it. "Of course, Master Chief. Your expertise is always welcome." The words tasted like brass in Rachel's mouth, but protocol demanded civility even when you wanted to tell someone exactly where they could shove their expertise. Cole nodded and took up position at the circuit's midpoint. His eyes tracked Rachel's movements with the focus of someone looking for mistakes. "Weighted carry relay," Rachel announced to the formation. 50 meters down and back. You'll maintain control of load and spacing. If your form breaks, so does your time. She paused, letting the words sink in. This exercise teaches you that carrying weight isn't about strength. It's about distribution and discipline. Muscles fail. Technique endures. The candidates began their runs in pairs. Torres paired with a male candidate named Brooks, both of them lifting a 60-pound sandbag and moving with the synchronized effort that came from 2 weeks of learning to trust each other. Rachel watched their form, noting the small adjustments Torres made to compensate for her smaller frame. Smart, adaptive, the hallmarks of someone who would survive. Cole circled the course, his presence making the candidates nervous in a way Rachel's instruction didn't. He stopped behind a female candidate named Park who was struggling with her grip on the bag. "Your hands are positioned wrong," Cole said. "Not an instruction, an accusation." Park adjusted her grip, overcorrected, nearly dropped the bag. Her partner caught it, but the damage was done. Park's confidence shattered across her face like glass. Rachel moved to intervene. Park, reset your stance. Remember the demo from Tuesday. Thumbs over, not under. Park nodded, corrected, continued. But the hesitation remained. Cole had planted it there with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to undermine without breaking regulations. The circuit continued. Rachel supervised, corrected, encouraged. Cole observed, commented, implied inadequacy without saying it directly. The candidates felt the tension between their instructors like atmospheric pressure before a storm. 20 minutes into the evolution, Tor's partner stumbled. The sandbag tilted sideways, threatening to pull both candidates off balance. Rachel stepped forward instinctively, hands moving to stabilize the load before it could drag Tor's down. Her fingers caught the edge of the bag, shifted her weight to compensate. Cole came through the gap like a linebacker breaking coverage. The collision looked accidental, would look accidental on any report. Cole's forward momentum, Rachel's sideways correction, two bodies occupying the same space at the wrong time. But the elbow that drove into Rachel's left ribcage was positioned with surgical precision, right where the titanium plates met damaged bone, right where Doc Palmer had warned her any impact would be catastrophic. The pain arrived in waves. First the sharp crack of something giving way, then the spreading fire as nerve endings registered trauma, then the copper taste of blood where she'd bitten through her lower lip trying not to scream. Rachel folded, not dramatically, not with the kind of collapse that would draw attention, just a slight bend at the waist, her hands going to her side, her breathing shortened to shallow gasps that didn't move her ribs more than absolutely necessary. "Commander," Tor's voice came from somewhere nearby, concerned, uncertain. Rachel forced herself upright. Every muscle in her core screamed objections. "I'm fine." The words came out steady despite the agony radiating from her chest. "Master Chief, watch your spacing." Cole's expression showed nothing. No remorse, no satisfaction, just the blank mask of someone who had done exactly what they intended and would never admit it. "Apologies, Commander." His tone suggested he was apologizing for existing in the same physical space, not for deliberately driving his elbow into her rebuilt ribs. Training environments can be unpredictable. Rachel straightened fully, ignoring the wet sound her ribs made when she inhaled. "Candidates, continue the evolution. Tours, take point." She walked toward the medical building. Not quickly, not slowly, just the measured pace of someone who had counted these steps before and would count them again. 23 from the circuit line to the entrance. Every one of them a small victory over the part of her body that wanted to shut down and process the damage. Tours appeared at her elbow. "Ma'am, should I call medical?" "No." "But you're hurt. I saw the impact." Rachel stopped, turned to face the young woman. Tor's concern was genuine. That made this harder. "Petty officer in the field, you'll take hits, sometimes from the enemy, sometimes from equipment failure, sometimes from pure bad luck." Rachel kept her voice level despite the pain. "What matters isn't whether you get hurt, it's whether you can finish the mission anyway." "This isn't the field, ma'am. This is training." "Training is where you learn to function through pain so you don't die when it matters." Rachel resumed walking. "Dismissed, Tours." The young woman hesitated, then saluted and returned to the grinder. Rachel continued to medical, counting steps, managing breathing, keeping her face neutral because she knew Cole was watching from a distance, and satisfaction was something she refused to give him. Doc Palmer looked up when Rachel entered the examination room. His expression shifted immediately from routine to concerned. "Let me guess, fell during training." "Something like that." Palmer's hands were efficient as always, pressing against her ribs with the kind of systematic approach that came from examining thousands of injuries. He didn't ask her to explain how she got hurt. He just located the damage and documented it. The X-rays told the story her body already knew. 2 new fractures, hairline cracks radiating from the titanium plate attachment points. The metal was still doing its job, holding everything together, but the bone around it was giving way under stress it wasn't meant to carry. "Commander," Palmer's voice had gone flat, the tone medical professionals used when they were about to deliver news you needed to hear but wouldn't want to. "This isn't sustainable." "How bad?" Palmer pulled up the CT scan images, enhanced the view to show detail. "See these dark lines? That's your bone fracturing around the plate. Every impact, every strain, they spread. Eventually, the plate will have nothing to anchor to." "Eventually, not now." "Eventually could be tomorrow, could be in an hour if you take another hit." Palmer turned from the screen to face her directly. "I'm recommending immediate medical discharge. You're looking at emergency surgery, or you're looking at dying during the next training evolution." The words should have frightened her. Maybe they would have if she hadn't already made peace with the possibility of dying for something that mattered. "No. Commander, this isn't a suggestion. This is medical necessity. And medical necessity can be waived if the officer in question accepts the risk." Rachel stood, suppressing the wince that wanted to accompany the movement. "I signed the waiver 2 weeks ago. I knew what I was accepting." Palmer's jaw tightened. "The waiver doesn't cover deliberate self-destruction." "I'm not destroying myself. I'm doing my job." "Your job will kill you." Rachel met his eyes. Better that than proving Cole Brennan right. Palmer understood then. She could see it in his expression, the way his professional concern gave way to something sadder. He'd been in the military long enough to recognize when someone was fighting a battle that had nothing to do with enemy combatants. "There's a candidate named Tors," Rachel said quietly. "She came here from an abusive home, joined the military to escape a stepfather who used her as a punching bag for 16 years. She paused. "She told me that watching me walk away from that collision today taught her more about strength than any classroom lecture could. She also watched you get deliberately injured by a superior officer. She watched me finish the mission despite the injury." Rachel moved toward the door. "That's the lesson that matters." Palmer pulled a form from his desk. "Medical waiver extension. If I sign this, I'm complicit in what happens next." "You're not complicit. You're allowing me to make my own choices." "And if you die making those choices?" "Then at least I died trying to prove women belong in the teams. That's more than most people can say about their deaths." Palmer signed the form with the heavy strokes of someone who knew he was making a mistake, but couldn't find the moral authority to refuse. He handed it to Rachel without comment. "Thank you, Doc." "Don't thank me. Just don't die in a way that makes me testify at your funeral about how I let this happen." Rachel returned to her quarters instead of the grinder. Her ribs needed rest even if her pride refused to admit it. She sat at her desk and opened the regulation files she'd been studying for 2 weeks. Section 47, B Instructor Operational Assessment Protocol. The language was dense, deliberately obscure in the way military regulations always were when they dealt with potentially controversial procedures. But the core remained clear. Any instructor could request evaluation of another instructor's operational readiness if there were documented concerns about judgment or candidate safety. Cole had just given her the documentation she needed. A knock interrupted her research. Rachel closed the laptop before calling for entry. Admiral Thomas Sullivan stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. and wearing the expression of a father who wanted to make amends but didn't quite know how. "Brought you some fuel." He extended one cup. Rachel accepted it, though coffee was the last thing her stomach wanted right now. "Thanks." Thomas entered and took the chair across from her desk. They sat in silence for a long moment, both holding their cups, both looking for words that would bridge 3 years of grief and blame and misunderstanding. "Anderson called me," Thomas finally said. "Told me about the incident during training today." Of course he had. Thomas Sullivan still had enough connections on base that nothing happened without him knowing. "It was an accident." "Was it?" Thomas studied her over the rim of his cup. Because from what Anderson described, it sounded like Brennan positioned himself exactly where you'd be if you tried to help that candidate. Rachel didn't respond. Confirmation would mean admitting Cole was actively trying to injure her. Denial would mean lying to her father's face. "Storm, I came up here to apologize." Thomas set his cup down with the kind of deliberate care that suggested the conversation was about to get harder. "What I said the other night about Jake covering for your weakness, that wasn't fair." "It was true." "Truth and fairness aren't always the same thing." Thomas leaned forward. "Jake made his choice to take that patrol. You didn't force him. Hell, you probably argued against it knowing how stubborn you are." "I did argue. He ignored me, said his ribs worked better than mine." Rachel felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came with talking about Jake. He smiled when he said it, like it was funny. "That sounds like Jake." Thomas's voice softened. "Your brother had a gift for making the hardest decisions seem easy." They sat with that truth for a moment. Rachel sipped her coffee even though it tasted like ash. Thomas looked at the photograph on her desk, the one of 3 Sullivans in dress whites, all of them younger and more whole than they would ever be again. "I blamed you because it was easier than blaming myself," Thomas said. "I pushed both my children into the teams, made Seal the price of admission to my approval. Jake died chasing that approval. You nearly died too." "Dad, we chose this life." "But I made you feel like you had to choose it." Thomas stood, moved to the window overlooking the grinder. "Your mother, God rest her, she used to tell me I was too hard on you too, that I was raising warriors instead of children. I told her warriors were what the world needed." "The world does need warriors." "The world needs children who grow into healthy adults." Thomas turned back to face her. "I needed to be a better father instead of just a better admiral." Rachel felt something shift in her chest. Not the pain of her ribs, though that was constant. Something deeper. The weight of carrying her father's disappointment for 3 years, feeling it lift just slightly. "I'm going to make Brennan face what he's been avoiding," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" Rachel pulled up the regulation on her laptop and turned the screen so Thomas could see. Section 47, B, Instructor Operational Assessment Protocol. Thomas read in silence, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that might have been respect. "You're going to force an evaluation." "I'm going to force him to confront his own guilt instead of projecting it onto me." Rachel closed the laptop. "He blames me for surviving when Jake didn't, but what he really can't forgive is that he froze in combat and Jake paid the price." "He told you that?" "Overheard him telling Cross 2 weeks ago. Cole saw the IED wire first, froze for 3 seconds. Jake stepped forward in those 3 seconds." Thomas absorbed this information with the analytical mind of someone who had spent 30 years evaluating tactical situations. So Brennan carries survivor's guilt compounded by failure in the moment. That's a heavy load. Heavy enough that he's trying to break me rather than face it. and you think an evaluation will force him to face it. I think it will give him a choice, face his guilt or destroy his career trying to avoid it. Rachel met her father's eyes. Either way, he stops hurting my candidates. Thomas studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her expression seemed to satisfy something he'd been looking for. "You're more like your mother than I ever gave you credit for," he said. "She had this way of cutting through bullshit and finding the truth that mattered. Used to drive me crazy. Used to make you better." "Yeah, it did." Thomas moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "Storm, whatever happens with this evaluation, I want you to know something." "What?" "I'm proud of you, not because you're a SEAL, not because you survived Helmand, but because you're still trying to do the right thing even when the right thing might destroy you." He swallowed hard. "Jake would be proud too." After he left, Rachel sat alone with her coffee and her ribs and the weight of her father's approval finally given after 3 years of absence. She should have felt relieved, should have felt validated. Instead, she just felt tired. The next training evolution was scheduled for 600 the following morning. Pool confidence drill. Rachel arrived early to check the equipment and found Maya Torres already there, sitting on the edge of the pool with her feet in the water. "Couldn't sleep?" Rachel asked. Torres looked up, startled. "No, ma'am, just thinking about today." Rachel sat beside her, ignoring the way her ribs protested the movement. "What about today?" "The way Master Chief Brennan looks at you, like he's waiting for you to fail." Torres hesitated. "Some of the female candidates are worried. They think if you can't make it, we don't stand a chance." "And what do you think?" Torres was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think you're stronger than you look, and I think Master Chief Brennan sees that strength, and it makes him angry because it reminds him of something he lost." "Smart kid." Rachel filed that observation away. "My stepfather used to hit my mother," Torres said quietly. "For 15 years he beat her. Beat me too when I got old enough to try to stop him. And every time he'd tell her it was her fault, that she provoked him, that if she just did things right, he wouldn't have to hurt her." Rachel listened, recognizing the shape of trauma and the way Torres' voice went flat recounting the story. "One day my mother fought back, hit him with a frying pan hard enough to crack his skull. Cops came, arrested her, not him. System protected the abuser because he was the one bleeding." Torres pulled her feet from the water. "That's when I learned that fighting back doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it just looks like refusing to quit." "Your mother sounds like a warrior." "She died in county jail waiting for trial. Heart attack, stress, the doctors said." Torres' hands clenched into fists. "But I know what killed her. Giving up killed her. She fought back once, then gave up when the system didn't care. And you joined the military to finish what she started." "I joined to prove that fighting back matters even when the system doesn't care. That surviving matters, that refusing to quit matters." Torres looked at Rachel directly. "You're doing the same thing, ma'am. Master Chief Brennan is trying to break you, but you keep showing up, keep teaching, keep refusing to quit." "Refusing to quit isn't always enough." "No, but it's necessary." Torres stood. "Ma'am, I don't know what happened between you and the Master Chief, but I know abuse when I see it. And what he did yesterday wasn't training. It was assault." Rachel stood as well carefully, her ribs screaming objections. "Torres, speaking that truth out loud could end your career. Staying silent while watching someone get hurt ended my mother's life." Torres met her eyes. "I won't make that mistake again." The pool confidence drill began at 600 with all 20 candidates assembled. The evolution was designed to test comfort underwater, the ability to control panic when your lungs were screaming for air, and your brain was screaming that you were drowning. Rachel supervised from the pool deck while Cole observed from the far side, clipboard in hand, eyes tracking every movement. The drill progressed in stages. First, underwater breath holding, then underwater equipment manipulation, then the final test that separated candidates who could manage fear from candidates who would panic and kill themselves or their teammates in a real combat scenario. Buddy breathing, two candidates sharing a single oxygen source underwater. One breathed, the other waited. Then they switched, trust made tangible. Panic meant death for both. Torres and her partner, a male candidate named Hayes, demonstrated textbook form. Calm passes, controlled breathing, the kind of teamwork that could save lives in the field. Cole moved to Rachel's position. Your best candidate is a woman. How does that feel? Feels like the selection process is working as designed. Or like the standards have dropped low enough that women can meet them. Cole's voice was casual, conversational, the kind of tone that made the words hit harder. Jake used to ace this drill, could stay under for 3 minutes without equipment. Torres barely manages 90 seconds. Torres manages exactly what the standards require. That's the definition of meeting standards. Is it? Cole turned to face her. Or is it the definition of lowering the bar until everyone can reach it? Rachel kept her eyes on the pool. The bar hasn't moved. The candidates have evolved. Evolved. Cole repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Interesting way to describe decline. The drill continued. Candidates surfaced, reported their times, moved to the next evolution. Everything proceeded according to protocol until Tor's second run. Rachel moved to correct Tor's breathing technique, stepping onto the pool deck's edge. Cole moved at the same moment, positioning himself on her left side, the side where her ribs were damaged, the side where one good hit would end this conversation permanently. Torres surfaced, pulled her regulator, started to report her time. Rachel leaned forward slightly to hear better over the pool's circulation system. Cole stepped back as if giving space. His elbows swung wide, catching the edge of Rachel's tactical vest. The impact wasn't hard. Didn't need to be. The angle was perfect. His elbow drove into the exact spot where Palmer had shown her the fractures spreading. The sound came first, crack, like stepping on a branch in a quiet forest. Then the pain, white-hot and absolute, spreading from her ribs through her entire torso. Rachel's vision grayed at the edges. Her knees tried to buckle. She caught herself on the pool railing, fingers gripping metal hard enough that her knuckles went white. Torres surfaced fully, saw Rachel's face, understood immediately. "Ma'am." Rachel forced words through the pain. "Report your time, petty officer." "Ma'am, you need medical." "I need you to report your time." Torres hesitated, torn between training and compassion. 92 seconds, ma'am." "Good, next pair." Rachel straightened, each movement a negotiation with her own body. Cole stood 3 feet away, expression neutral, clipboard in hand like he was just another instructor observing another drill. "Commander, you should probably get that looked at." His voice carried just enough concern to sound legitimate to anyone listening. Pool decks can be slippery. Rachel met his eyes. They both knew what had just happened. They both knew she couldn't prove it. And they both knew Cole would do it again if given the opportunity. "Thank you for your concern, Master Chief. I'm fine." She walked to the medical building. 23 steps that felt like 23 miles. Every breath sent lightning through her chest. Every heartbeat pounded against ribs that were giving up their fight to stay whole. But she walked. Didn't run. Didn't limp. Just walked with the measured pace of someone who refused to show weakness even when weakness was all she had left. Doc Palmer didn't speak when she entered. just pointed to the examination table. The X-rays were worse this time, not just hairline fractures, full separation. The rib had pulled completely free from the titanium plate. One more hit and the plate would tear through soft tissue looking for somewhere to anchor. One more hit and she'd be drowning in her own blood. "Emergency surgery," Palmer said. "Today, or I'm filing a formal medical incapacity report with Captain Anderson." Rachel looked at the X-ray, looked at her own bones failing to hold her together, looked at the evidence of what Cole was doing and how close he was to succeeding. "I need until tomorrow." "You need surgery now." "Tomorrow, after I submit my evaluation request." Palmer's expression said he understood. This wasn't about staying fit for duty. This was about staying conscious long enough to finish what she started. "I can give you tonight," he said finally. "But tomorrow morning, 600, you're in that operating room whether you walk in or I have you carried." Rachel nodded. Palmer wrapped her ribs in combat tape, layer after layer until her entire torso was rigid. It wasn't a fix. It was a temporary seal on something that needed proper repair, but temporary was all she needed. She returned to her quarters and opened her laptop. The evaluation request was ready, had been ready for 2 weeks. Now she just needed to submit it and trigger the chain of events that would force Cole to face what he'd been running from. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. This would ruin him. The evaluation would reveal his instability, would document his violence, would end his career or at minimum force him into PTSD treatment he'd spent 3 years avoiding. Jake's voice echoed in her memory. From that last conversation before the patrol that killed him, "Take care of Cole, he'll blame himself." But Jake hadn't known Cole would transform that blame into violence. Hadn't known Cole would become the thing they'd spent their careers fighting against, the abuser hiding behind authority. Rachel typed the final paragraph of the evaluation request. Concerns about operational judgment, documented incidents of inappropriate physical contact, risk to candidate safety and program integrity, request for immediate psychological evaluation and stress assessment. She saved the document. Tomorrow she would submit it. Tonight she would make sure she had all the evidence she needed. A thought struck her. If Cole had been this aggressive with her, what had he been doing to the candidates when she wasn't watching? Rachel opened a new search window and pulled up the candidate incident reports from the past 2 weeks. 17 reports, all minor, all explained as training accidents. But the pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Female candidates injured at twice the rate of male candidates. Injuries clustered around evolutions where Cole had supervisory authority. The documentation she'd been building suddenly felt inadequate. She needed more, needed something that would make the evaluation undeniable. Another knock. Rachel closed the laptop before answering. Daniel Cross stood in the corridor, hands shoved in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Petty officer, something I can help you with." Cross glanced down the corridor, checking for observers. "Ma'am, can I come in? This isn't official business." Rachel stepped aside. Cross entered, closed the door, took a breath like someone about to jump off a cliff. "I've been recording Master Chief Brennan." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rachel processed them carefully. "Explain." Cross pulled out his phone, queued up an audio file. 8 months ago, I started noticing inconsistencies. Female candidates getting injured more often. The chief making comments about standards, about women not belonging. He paused. "I'm former Marine. Saw some shit in Afghanistan. Saw good Marines cover up bad behavior because brotherhood was more important than justice. And you didn't want to see that happen again." "No, ma'am." Cross played the first recording. Cole's voice talking to someone named Williams. If the commander can't handle basic pool ops, she sure as hell can't handle combat instruction. We need to document her failures before she gets candidates killed. Cross played another. Then another. 8 months of recordings. Cole's voice laying out his campaign, his intention to force Rachel's removal, his belief that women were destroying the teams. Why are you showing me this now? Cross met her eyes. Because yesterday I watched him deliberately injure you. Not an accident, not training gone wrong, deliberate assault. His voice hardened. I've carried these recordings for 8 months wondering what to do with them, wondering if speaking up would matter or if it would just end my career. And what changed? I watched Tors pull you aside after the pool drill, watched her ask if you were okay, watched you tell her that SEALs don't quit just because they're hurt. Cross swallowed hard. My sister was in an abusive marriage. 3 years. Her husband used to break her ribs. Police never did anything because he was a cop and cops protect their own. Rachel understood. This isn't about me or Cole. This is about your sister. This is about all of you. Every woman who gets told her injuries are her own fault, that if she just performed better she wouldn't get hurt. Cross's hands clenched. My sister died 2 years ago. Husband pushed her down the stairs, broke her neck, said she fell. System believed him because he was wearing a badge. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Use the recordings. End this before he kills you the way my brother-in-law killed my sister. Cross left the drive and walked out. Rachel sat with 8 months of evidence and the weight of knowing that her fight wasn't just personal anymore. It had become something larger, something that mattered beyond her own need to prove Cole wrong. She spent the next 4 hours reviewing the recordings, building a file, documenting the pattern. When she finished, it was nearly midnight and her ribs were screaming for the pain medication Palmer had prescribed. She took it, let the chemicals dull the worst of the agony, and tried to sleep. The next training evolution was weighted carry relay. Same exercise where Cole had first injured her 3 weeks ago. Rachel stood at the midpoint line, clipboard ready, ribs wrapped so tight she could barely breathe. Every candidate could see she was hurt. None of them said anything. They'd learned by now that mentioning injury was the fastest way to get told pain was just information. Cole supervised from the far end, watching, waiting. Rachel knew what was coming, had known since Palmer showed her the x-rays. One more hit and she was done. One more collision and the rib would tear through tissue and organ and end this fight permanently. The candidates ran their carries. Tors and Hayes maintaining perfect form, Brooks struggling but pushing through, Park still hesitant but improving. Then Jackson, male candidate 24, struggled with his grip. The weighted bag tilted, threatened to pull him sideways. Rachel stepped forward to correct the hold, hands moving to demonstrate proper technique. Cole came through like a freight train. No pretense this time. No accidental collision, just pure forward momentum aimed at Rachel's left side. His knee drove straight into her ribs with the force of someone who had calculated exactly how much pressure it would take to finish what he started. The sound was louder this time. Crack, like breaking wood, like shattering bone, like the sound of something giving up its fight to stay whole. Rachel dropped, couldn't help it. Her knees hit the grinder hard enough to scrape skin through her uniform pants. Her hands went to her side, felt wetness spreading beneath her vest. Blood or internal fluid she couldn't tell. Didn't matter. Cole's voice came from somewhere above her. Low, private, meant only for her ears. Jake's waiting for you, Sullivan. Time to stop making him wait alone. Rachel's vision grayed. Her lungs couldn't pull air. The pain was absolute, consuming, the kind that meant something vital had broken and wouldn't heal without intervention. Tor's face appeared in her failing vision. "Ma'am, ma'am." Rachel forced words through the pain. "Belay that order, I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." Rachel pushed herself upright. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through her chest, but she stood anyway. Stood because sitting meant showing weakness. Stood because 20 candidates were watching to see if pain could defeat discipline. She looked at Cole. Their eyes met. His expression showed satisfaction. Hers showed nothing but the cold calculation of someone who had just been given exactly the evidence they needed. "Class dismissed." Rachel's voice came out steady despite everything. 500 tomorrow, full kit, be ready." She walked to medical, 23 steps, each one a victory over the part of her body that wanted to collapse. Each one counted, each one necessary. Doc Palmer took one look at her face and hit the emergency call button. "CT scan now." The images showed what Rachel already knew: complete rib separation. The titanium plate had torn free and was floating in her chest cavity. Internal bleeding. Not catastrophic yet, but heading that direction. "Surgery, right now." Palmer's voice had no room for argument. "You've got maybe 6 hours before this kills you." Rachel pulled out her phone, sent the evaluation request to Captain Anderson with the recording files attached. Then she looked at Palmer. "I need you to testify that these injuries were caused by deliberate impact, not training accident, deliberate assault." "I'll testify to whatever the truth requires." "Good." Rachel felt consciousness starting to slip. "Schedule the surgery, but first I need you to document something for the record." Palmer pulled out his recording device. "Go ahead." Rachel's voice was fading but clear. "Master Chief Cole Brennan has systematically assaulted me over the past 3 weeks. Today's attack was the culmination of a pattern designed to force my medical discharge. I'm submitting formal charges of assault on a superior officer and requesting immediate evaluation of his fitness for duty." She passed out before Palmer could respond. Rachel woke in a hospital bed with her father sitting beside her and Anderson standing at the foot holding a tablet. Her ribs felt like they were wrapped in concrete. The surgery had happened. She'd survived it. That was more than she'd expected. "How long was I out?" 14 hours, Thomas said. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. That was new. "They had to rebuild half your ribcage." Anderson stepped forward. "Commander Sullivan, I've reviewed your evaluation request and the supporting documentation. I've also reviewed the recordings Petty Officer Cross provided." He paused. "Master Chief Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Preliminary findings support charges of assault, conduct unbecoming, and violation of instructor protocols." Rachel processed this through the fog of pain medication. "The candidates." "Your class has been temporarily reassigned to other instructors. Tours asked to be allowed to visit once you're cleared for visitors." "Tell her yes." Anderson nodded. "There's one more thing." Cross came forward with his sister's story. "It's given several other candidates courage to report their own concerns about Brennan's conduct. We're looking at a pattern of behavior going back years." Rachel closed her eyes. This was bigger than her fight with Cole, bigger than Jake's death. This was about an institution protecting abusers instead of victims. "What happens now?" "Now you recover," Thomas said, "and we make sure Cole Brennan faces consequences for what he did." Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to say she needed to be there for the investigation, but her body had other plans. She slipped back into medicated sleep with her father's hand holding hers, and the knowledge that she'd survived long enough to tell the truth. The truth would have to be enough. 6 weeks felt like 6 months when you spent them waiting for medical clearance to do the work you were born for. Rachel sat across from Doc Palmer, reviewing the latest scans of her rebuilt chest cavity. The titanium cage they'd installed looked like architecture designed by someone who understood that bone alone wasn't strong enough for what combat demanded. Metal struts and surgical mesh held her ribcage together, in a configuration that was stronger than the original but more fragile in ways that mattered. "You're healing better than expected," Palmer said. He pulled up a comparison image showing the progression from emergency surgery to current state. "The cage is stable, no signs of rejection or secondary fractures, lung capacity at 92%. When can I return to duty?" Palmer set down his tablet with the deliberate care of someone about to deliver news they knew wouldn't be well received. "Limited duty, classroom instruction, tactical planning, administrative work. You can return to those immediately. And field instruction. Never. One good impact to that cage, and the mesh tears through soft tissue like a blade. You'd bleed out before medical could reach you." Rachel had expected this answer, had known it was coming since she'd woken from surgery and felt the unnatural rigidity of her chest. But knowing and accepting were different animals. What about supervised evaluation, non-contact scenarios, observation only? Palmer studied her with the expression of someone who had spent enough time in military medicine to recognize when a patient was negotiating rather than accepting. "What are you planning, Commander?" "Instructor evaluation protocol, range 47. Night operations assessment for candidates showing signs of stress. I'd be supervising from the control station. No physical involvement." "And Master Chief Brennan, is he part of this evaluation?" "He's on administrative leave pending investigation. This evaluation is about establishing baseline protocols for future use." Palmer didn't believe her. Rachel could see it in his eyes, but belief wasn't required. Just medical clearance for limited duty with specific restrictions. "I'll sign off on observation-only participation. But Commander, if you're planning to confront Brennan, do it through legal channels. Not in the dark where nobody can document what happens." "I appreciate the concern, Doc, but I'm not planning confrontation. I'm planning evaluation." After Palmer signed the clearance, Rachel walked to Captain Anderson's office. The afternoon sun painted the grinder in shades of gold that reminded her of Helmand. Everything reminded her of Helmand lately. The heat, the dust, the way light hit concrete at certain angles. Memory was persistent like that. It didn't ask permission to arrive. Anderson looked up from his desk when Rachel entered. "Commander Sullivan, didn't expect you back for another month." "Medical cleared me for limited duty, classroom instruction, and administrative evaluation." "Administrative evaluation." Anderson repeated the phrase like he was tasting it for poison. "That wouldn't happen to involve range 47 and a certain Master Chief currently under investigation, would it?" Rachel set a file folder on his desk. Inside was the complete evaluation protocol she'd been developing during recovery. Night operations stress assessment, psychological baseline testing, judgment under pressure scenarios, all legitimate training tools that happen to require the participation of instructors being evaluated. Anderson read through the proposal in silence. When he looked up, his expression was carefully neutral. "This is comprehensive, well-researched, probably should have been standard practice years ago." He paused. "It's also transparently designed to force Cole Brennan into a controlled environment where his instability will be documented." "Is that a problem, sir?" "It's strategy, which I respect, but Brennan's attorney is already claiming entrapment. If you orchestrate a scenario designed to make him fail, it strengthens that claim. The scenario tests legitimate instructor competencies: navigation, judgment under stress, adherence to safety protocols. If Brennan fails those tests, it's because he's unfit for duty, not because the test was unfair. Anderson closed the folder. I'll approve this on 3 conditions. 1, you stay in the control station. No field participation. 2, we have legal counsel present to observe. 3, everything gets recorded. Video, audio, vital signs monitoring, complete documentation. Agreed. And Commander, off the record, be careful. Brennan's breaking. Broken men do unpredictable things. Rachel left Anderson's office and found Maya Torres waiting in the corridor. The young woman had been checking on her regularly during recovery, bringing books, updating her on training progress, building the kind of connection that went beyond instructor and student into something closer to mentorship. "Ma'am, heard you got medical clearance." "Limited duty, observation only." Torres fell into step beside her as they walked toward the parking lot. "The candidates have been asking about you, wanting to know when you'd be back." "What did you tell them?" "That you'd be back when you were ready. That recovery isn't weakness." Torres paused at the building exit. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Always." "What you're planning with Range 47, with Master Chief Brennan. Is it about justice or revenge?" The question hit harder than it should have. Rachel stopped walking and turned to face the young woman directly. "What makes you think I'm planning anything?" "Because I would be. If someone nearly killed me and the system moved too slow, I'd want to force the issue." Tor's voice carried the weight of personal experience. "My stepfather beat my mother for 15 years. System did nothing. When she finally fought back, they arrested her. That's when I learned waiting for justice doesn't always work." Rachel understood. Torres wasn't judging. She was recognizing a pattern. "It's about documentation. Brennan's a decorated SEAL whose career is being destroyed by PTSD the Navy failed to treat. If I can create a controlled environment that proves he needs help while also proving he's currently unfit for duty, that serves justice better than revenge. And if he attacks you again, then it's documented, on video, with legal counsel present, and the system has no choice but to act." Torres nodded slowly. "Ma'am, whatever you need for this evaluation, I'm in. I need you in the communication station, monitoring channels, recording everything that gets said on open frequencies." "I can do that, and ma'am, make him face what he's been running from, for your brother, for yourself, for every candidate he might hurt if he stays." 2 days later, Rachel stood in the Range 47 control station watching the sun set over the Pacific. The abandoned ship hull that served as the training facility looked like a ghost rising from the desert floor. Rusted metal and concrete shells configured into a maze designed to simulate close-quarters combat. The perfect environment for testing how instructors handled stress when they couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. Captain Anderson stood beside her reviewing the evaluation parameters one final time. "Brennan and Cross will enter at 2200 hours. Navigation exercise with simulated equipment failure. You'll monitor from here. Legal counsel is in the observation room. Everything recording." "What did you tell Brennan about the purpose?" "Standard instructor competency evaluation. Required for all personnel returning from administrative leave. He doesn't know you're involved." That was tactical. If Cole knew Rachel was running the evaluation, he'd refuse to participate or lawyer up immediately. But a routine competency check was harder to avoid. Daniel Cross appeared at the control station entrance looking uncomfortable in his field gear. The young man had been cooperative since providing the recordings, but clearly wasn't happy about participating in what felt like an ambush. "Sir, ma'am, I want to state for the record that I'm participating under direct orders. I don't think this is the right way to handle Master Chief Brennan's situation." Anderson nodded. "Noted, your objection is logged, but you're still participating." "Yes, sir." After Cross left, Rachel pulled up the facility schematics on the main screen. Range 47 was a 3-level structure with multiple entry points and a central objective beacon. Standard navigation required 40 minutes. Under stress with equipment failure, 60 to 90 minutes. Plenty of time for an unstable instructor to reveal instability. At 2200 hours, the facility went dark. Not training dark where emergency lights stayed active. Complete blackout. The kind that turned spatial awareness into guesswork and familiar routes into alien territory. Rachel watched thermal imaging feeds as Cole and Cross entered from separate points. Cole moved with the confidence of someone who had run night operations for 2 decades. Smooth, efficient, professional. Cross was more hesitant, checking corners, verifying each step before committing. The communications channel crackled with Cole's voice. "Cross, sound off. Confirm entry point." "North entrance, Chief. Moving to Sector 2. "Copy, I'm coming from west. We'll converge at the central beacon." Standard procedure, by the book. Rachel waited. 10 minutes into the exercise, she triggered the first equipment malfunction. Cross's night vision flickered and died. On thermal imaging, she watched him stop, assess, switch to backup systems. Exactly as trained. Cole's channel opened. Cross status. Night vision failure. Switching to thermal backup. Copy that. Continue to objective. 15 minutes in, Rachel triggered Cole's equipment failure. His thermal imaging cut out completely. Now both instructors were operating on backup systems in complete darkness. Navigation became significantly harder. Stress levels climbed. Cole's breathing changed over the comm. Faster, shallower. The sound of someone whose autonomic nervous system was recognizing threat even if conscious mind hadn't caught up yet. "Cross, I've lost thermals. Going to manual navigation." "Chief, we can abort and reset equipment." "Negative, we complete the evolution, just like downrange. Equipment fails, mission continues." Rachel made notes. Cole was pushing through despite legitimate safety concerns. That showed dedication or showed someone whose judgment was compromised by ego. The line was thin. 20 minutes in, Cole's voice came through the comm channel again. Lower this time, talking to himself more than Cross. "Just like Helmand, dark, can't see, have to trust training." Rachel leaned forward. This was deviation from baseline. Instructors didn't narrate their internal process during evaluations. Anderson noticed too. Is he talking to someone or himself? Himself, processing stress out loud, possible sign of disassociation. On thermal imaging, Cole had stopped moving. He stood in a corridor junction, head swiveling, checking corners that didn't have threats, checking them again. The behavior of someone whose training was competing with trauma for control of action. Cross's voice, "Chief, you stopped, everything okay?" Silence for 5 seconds, then Cole's response strained. "Fine, just verifying route." But he didn't move. He stood in the junction for another 30 seconds before finally choosing a direction. The hesitation was notable. Cole Brennan didn't hesitate. 22 years of experience didn't produce hesitation, but PTSD did. Rachel triggered the next scenario phase. Over the facility's PA system, she played a recording. Not loud, just ambient sound designed to test stress response. the sound of an IED detonation, distant, like something happening 3 buildings over. Cole's reaction was immediate. He dropped to a crouch, weapon at ready position even though this was training and weapons weren't loaded. His breathing spiked. On the biometric monitor that tracked his heart rate, Rachel watched it jump from 90 beats per minute to 140. Contact cross sound off, where are you? Chief, that was just audio test, part of the evaluation. There's no contact. Cole didn't respond. On thermal imaging, he was moving now. Fast, aggressive, clearing corners with the intensity of someone in actual combat. The professional instructor had disappeared. The combat veteran operating on threat response had taken over. Rachel opened a direct channel. Master Chief Brennan, this is Control. The audio was simulated. There is no active threat. Please acknowledge. Cole's voice came back hard. Who is this? Where's Morrison? This is Commander Sullivan. I'm running tonight's evaluation. Please acknowledge that you understand there is no threat. The comm channel went silent. Rachel could almost hear Cole processing the information. She was here. She was running this. The person he'd tried to break was now the person testing whether he'd broken himself. When Cole spoke again, his voice had changed. You set this up. I designed a legitimate instructor evaluation protocol. You're being evaluated. Please continue to the objective beacon. You're using me, making me look unstable. I'm documenting your response to standard training stress. If you're stable, you'll complete the evolution professionally. If you're not, that will also be documented. Cole's breathing was ragged now. On the monitor, his heart rate was climbing. 150, 160, approaching the threshold where judgment became compromised by physiological stress. Jake would be ashamed of you, Cole said, using his death like this, turning his sacrifice into your revenge. Rachel kept her voice level. Jake would want you to get help instead of hurting people. Continue to objective, Master Chief. Cole moved, but not toward the objective. On thermal imaging, Rachel watched him change direction. He was heading toward the control station, toward her. Anderson reached for the abort switch. Rachel stopped him. Let it play out. He needs to make this choice. Commander, if he's targeting you, we abort. He's not targeting me. He's running toward the only thing he can control. Let him come. Cole's voice over calm. You want to see unstable? I'll show you unstable. He was moving fast now, through corridors, upstairs. The training facility had multiple routes to the control station, but Cole was taking the most direct. No tactical consideration, just forward momentum driven by emotion. Cross's voice uncertain. Chief, where are you going? The objective is the other direction. New objective, Cross. New priority. Rachel stood and moved to the control station door. Anderson grabbed her arm. Don't. If he's escalating, we contain him from here. If I hide, it confirms everything he believes, that I'm weak, that I can't face him. Rachel pulled free. I'm going to give him the confrontation he's been running toward for 3 years, but on my terms, in my space, with every word recorded. She stepped out of the control station into the corridor connecting to the Range 47 facility. The hallway was lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in red. Rachel walked 20 paces and stopped, waited. Cole appeared at the far end of the corridor, covered in dust. Night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead, eyes reflecting red light like something feral. He stopped when he saw her. They stood 50 feet apart. 2 warriors who had both survived Helmand, who had both lost Jake, who had both carried the same guilt in different directions until it brought them here. You manipulated this, Cole said, designed it to make me fail. I designed it to show the truth. Whether you fail or succeed is your choice. Cole moved closer, 30 feet now. The truth is you got Jake killed, and instead of accepting that, you're destroying me to make yourself feel better. The truth is Jake took my patrol rotation because his ribs were bothering him. The ribs he injured 6 months earlier pulling me out of a building in Kandahar. He died covering a weakness he developed saving my life. Rachel's voice stayed steady. That's the truth you've been running from. Not that I got him killed. That he chose to protect me even when it cost him everything. 20 feet. Cole's hands were clenched into fists. I froze, 3 seconds, saw the tripwire and froze while Jake moved forward. I know you told me. You know, and you're still doing this, still making me relive it. I'm making you face it. There's a difference. Rachel didn't step back, didn't show the fear that wanted to surface. Cole, you've spent 3 years blaming me because blaming yourself was too painful, but pain doesn't go away when you project it onto someone else. It just spreads. 10 feet now, close enough that Rachel could see the tears streaming down Cole's face, close enough to see that this wasn't rage anymore. This was grief finally breaking through the armor that had been holding it back. I can't forgive myself, Cole said. He was my brother, my responsibility, and I failed him. Jake forgave you before he died, in the medevac bird. He told me to take care of you, said you'd blame yourself, said you needed to know it wasn't your fault. Cole's forward momentum stopped. He said that. Last coherent words. Take care of Cole, he'll blame himself. Tell him I don't. Rachel's voice cracked slightly. I've been carrying that message for 3 years waiting for you to be ready to hear it. Cole collapsed, not dramatically, just a gradual giving way at the knees until he was sitting on the corridor floor with his back against the wall. 22 years of service, a decorated SEAL, reduced to a broken man crying in a hallway because the weight he'd been carrying was finally too heavy to bear standing up. Rachel moved closer, sat down beside him, not touching, just present. I nearly killed you, Cole said between sobs, multiple times because I couldn't face this. I know. How do I come back from that? How do I make that right? You get help, real help. You face the trauma instead of using other people as targets for it. You rebuild yourself the way I rebuilt my ribs, with support structures that hold you together when the original design fails. They sat in silence, broken only by Cole's breathing gradually slowing from crisis to something approaching normal. From somewhere down the hall, Rachel heard footsteps. Anderson and the legal team approaching to document the aftermath. Before they arrived, Cole spoke one more time. In those 3 seconds I froze, Jake looked at me, made eye contact, and he smiled, like he knew what was about to happen and accepted it because getting me out mattered more than getting himself out. Cole's voice was hollow. I've spent 3 years trying to understand what that smile meant. It meant he loved you, even at the end, even knowing the cost. He loved you enough to choose your life over his own. Anderson arrived with base security and the legal team. Cole was helped to his feet, his rights read, his options explained. Medical evaluation, psychological assessment, potential criminal charges offset by institutional failure to provide adequate PTSD treatment. Rachel watched them lead him away and felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just exhaustion. The kind that came from fighting battles that nobody really won. Maya Torres appeared from the communications station. Ma'am, I recorded everything. His admission about freezing, his statements about the assault, all of it documented with timestamp and legal witness present. Good, make sure it's logged properly. Ma'am, can I ask something? Go ahead. You could have destroyed him, humiliated him, made him look like a monster, but you didn't. You gave him space to break down with dignity. Why? Rachel looked at the young woman who represented everything this fight had been about. The next generation who deserved better than inheriting broken systems and traumatized instructors. Because Cole Brennan isn't a monster. He's a warrior who carried war home and didn't get the help he needed before it turned toxic. Destroying him doesn't fix the system. Getting him help and changing the protocols does. Tours absorbed this. That's why you built the Sullivan Protocol, not to punish people like the Chief, to catch them before they become people like the Chief. Exactly. The aftermath took hours. Statements to legal, medical evaluation of Rachel's condition post-confrontation, debriefing with Anderson about what the recordings showed and what charges might be filed. By the time Rachel left the base, it was nearly 400 and the sky was starting to lighten toward dawn. Her father waited in the parking lot. Thomas Sullivan leaned against his car, looking older and more tired than she'd seen him since the funeral. Anderson called me, told me what happened. Cole broke, finally faced what he's been running from. And you, how are you facing it? Rachel leaned against the car beside her father. They stood in silence, watching the sun begin its climb over the Pacific. Somewhere out there, Cole Brennan was in a hospital room being evaluated by psychiatrists who would determine whether he was fit to stand trial or needed treatment first. Somewhere out there, 20 SEAL candidates were waking up to continue training under instructors who were better vetted than they used to be. And somewhere between those two realities, the system was slowly changing because someone had refused to accept that assault was just the cost of doing business. I'm facing it by making sure it means something, Rachel said. Jake's death, Cole's breakdown, my injuries, all of it has to mean something or it's just waste. Thomas put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. The gesture was simple, paternal, the kind of comfort she'd needed 3 years ago but was only receiving now. Your brother would be proud of you, not because you won, because you fought with integrity even when revenge would have been easier. Revenge was tempting. I know, that's what makes integrity matter, choosing right when wrong is available. They drove to an all-night diner and ordered coffee and breakfast neither of them was particularly hungry for, but the ritual of sitting together, of processing what had happened, of being father and daughter instead of admiral and commander, that mattered more than the food. What happens now? Thomas asked. Now the investigation proceeds. JAG reviews the evidence. Cole gets evaluated. The Sullivan Protocol gets implemented across all SEAL training facilities, and I go back to teaching candidates who deserve instructors that aren't broken. And Maya Tours, the young woman who's been checking on you. She's going to be a great SEAL, better than I was, because she's learning in a system that's starting to value psychological health as much as physical strength. Thomas smiled slightly, starting to, not there yet. No, but better than it was, and that's progress. They finished breakfast as full morning arrived. The diner filled with early shift workers and people ending night shifts, normal people living normal lives that didn't include titanium ribs or PTSD or brothers who died in foreign deserts. Rachel envied them briefly, then let the envy go. Her life had meaning. Different meaning than theirs, but meaning nonetheless. When they left the diner, Thomas pulled her into another hug. I'm proud of you, Storm, have been all along, just took me too long to say it. You're saying it now, that's enough. Rachel drove back to her apartment as the city woke up around her. She thought about Cole in his hospital room, about Jake in his grave, about Tours preparing for another day of training, about all the ways lives intersected and diverged and came back together in patterns too complex to predict. The Sullivan Protocol would be officially implemented in 60 days. Range 47 would become standard evaluation for all instructors showing signs of stress. Anonymous reporting structures would give candidates safe channels to raise concerns. And slowly, over years, the culture would shift from accepting trauma as inevitable to treating it as preventable. That was legacy, not perfect, not complete, but better. Rachel fell asleep thinking about Jake's smile in those final 3 seconds. The smile Cole had spent 3 years trying to understand. She understood it now. It was acceptance. It was love. It was choosing to let someone else live even if it meant you didn't. It was everything the teams were supposed to represent, and everything they sometimes forgot in the rush to appear invincible. Jake hadn't been invincible, neither was Cole, neither was Rachel. But they were all warriors, and warriors fought with whatever weapons they had available. Sometimes those weapons were rifles and grenades. Sometimes they were protocols and documentation, and the refusal to accept that things couldn't change. Rachel's weapons had changed, but she was still fighting. Still winning. Still serving. Just in different ways than she'd imagined when she first put on the uniform. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was exactly what Jake would have wanted. The grinder looked different at 500 when you returned as someone who had been broken and rebuilt. Rachel stood at the edge watching candidates assemble for morning formation, their boots making the familiar sounds against concrete that had absorbed a generation's worth of sweat and determination. 8 weeks since the surgery. 8 weeks of learning to move with titanium mesh where bone used to be. 8 weeks of wondering if she could still do the job that had nearly killed her. Commander Morrison stood at the formation's head, clipboard in hand, voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of service. He spotted Rachel and gave a slight nod, professional acknowledgement between instructors, the kind that said welcome back without making it a ceremony. Maya Torres stood in the front row looking stronger than she had 2 months ago. The other female candidates flanked her, 7 women who had survived everything the program could throw at them and were still standing. Behind them, 12 male candidates maintained their positions with the discipline that came from understanding this wasn't just training anymore. This was proving ground for whether the future of SEAL operations would look different than the past. Morrison finished his briefing and dismissed the formation. Candidates dispersed to their assigned evolutions. Torres broke formation and approached Rachel with proper military bearing, despite the obvious desire to move faster. "Ma'am, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Medical cleared me for limited instruction, classroom work, tactical lectures, the things old instructors do when their bodies can't keep up with their mouths." Torres smiled slightly. "Old instructors have wisdom young ones don't, ma'am. That's what you taught us." "I taught you that. Every time you walked away from Master Chief Brennan's provocations, every time you chose discipline over anger, every time you counted steps instead of throwing punches." Torres' expression grew serious. "That taught us more than any combat drill could." Morrison appeared at Rachel's shoulder. "Commander Sullivan, you're early. Thought your first lecture wasn't until 900. Wanted to observe the morning evolution, see how the candidates have progressed." "They've progressed well. Torres here is leading the class in most metrics. Brooks and Hayes not far behind." Morrison gestured toward the obstacle course where candidates were beginning their runs. "Your protocol implementation starts today, actually. First psychological screening under the new system. Thought you'd want to see it in action." Rachel's chest tightened. Not pain from the ribs, something else. Pride mixed with apprehension. The Sullivan Protocol was real now. Not just words in a document, but actual procedure being implemented with actual candidates who would be protected by it. I'd very much like to observe, sir. The psychological screening happened in Conference Room C with Dr. Sarah Chen, the Navy psychologist brought in specifically to implement the new evaluation standards. Chen was in her 40s with the calm demeanor of someone who had spent 2 decades getting people to reveal truths they wanted to hide. Rachel watched through the observation window as Chen interviewed Petty Officer Marcus Webb, one of the male candidates who had been flagged for minor behavioral inconsistencies. Nothing serious, just enough variation from baseline to warrant evaluation under the new protocols. "Tell me about your relationship with your instructors," Chen said. Her tone was conversational, non-threatening. Webb shifted in his chair. "They're tough but fair, push us hard but don't cross lines." "And before the protocol implementation, how were things different?" Webb hesitated. Rachel could see the internal debate playing across his face. Loyalty to the old system versus honesty about what he'd experienced. "There was an instructor before, Master Chief Brennan. He was different." "Different how?" "More personal, like he was fighting his own war and we were just collateral damage." Webb's hands clenched slightly. "He never hit me, never crossed that line with the male candidates. But the way he looked at Commander Sullivan, at some of the female candidates, it was like he was waiting for them to fail so he could prove a point." "And how did that make you feel?" "Angry, helpless, like I should say something but didn't know if anyone would listen." Webb met Chen's eyes. "Then Commander Sullivan got hurt, really hurt, and I realized silence makes you complicit." Chen made notes without judgment. "Do you feel the current training environment is safer?" "Yes, ma'am. Commander Morrison runs a tight program, pushes us hard, but there's no personal agenda behind it. It's about making us better SEALs, not proving we don't belong." After the interview, Chen joined Rachel in the observation room. "Your protocol is working," Chen said. "Webb wouldn't have felt safe enough to share that 6 months ago. The anonymous reporting structure, the regular screenings, they're creating space for candidates to speak without fear of retaliation." "One interview doesn't prove the system works." "No, but 15 interviews showing the same pattern of increased trust and reduced fear does." Chen pulled up data on her tablet. "Since implementation, we've had 23 reports filed. 15 were minor issues resolved through counseling. 6 were legitimate concerns that resulted in instructor reassignment. 2 were serious enough to warrant investigation." 2 serious incidents in 8 weeks. 2 incidents that got reported and addressed instead of festering until they exploded into assault. Chen's expression was gentle but firm. "Commander, your experience with Brennan wasn't unique. It was just the one that got documented thoroughly enough to force change. The protocol is catching problems before they reach that level." Rachel absorbed this. 23 reports, 23 situations where candidates felt safe enough to speak up. That was progress, not perfect, but better. "Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, could this protocol have prevented what happened with Master Chief Brennan?" Chen considered the question carefully. If it had been in place 3 years ago when he returned from Helmand showing signs of PTSD, yes. The mandatory screening would have caught his deterioration early. Treatment could have started before the trauma expressed as violence. She paused. "But protocols are only as good as the people implementing them. The real change isn't the paperwork. It's the culture shift that makes reporting safe and intervention normal." At 900, Rachel stood before 40 SEAL candidates in the advanced tactics classroom. Not her original class. A new generation who had heard about what happened but hadn't lived through it. Tours sat in the front row alongside candidates from 3 different training cycles, all of them looking at Rachel with the kind of attention that came from knowing the instructor had earned every word she was about to speak. My name is Commander Rachel Sullivan. I've been a SEAL for 12 years, 4 deployments, multiple combat operations, and 8 weeks ago I nearly died in a training accident that wasn't an accident. The room was silent, the kind of silence that meant everyone was listening not just with their ears but with their full attention. I'm not here to talk about what happened to me specifically. You can read the reports if you're curious. I'm here to talk about what combat actually is when you strip away the Hollywood version and the recruiting posters. Rachel moved from behind the podium, ignoring the way her ribs protested the movement. Standing still felt like hiding. Moving felt like engaging. Combat is 3% action and 97% waiting. Waiting to deploy, waiting for orders, waiting for the enemy to make a mistake. And in that waiting, your mind does things, creates narratives, builds fears, turns shadows into threats. She pulled up an image on the screen behind her. Helmand Province, dusty compounds, narrow streets that looked like every other narrow street in every other combat zone. My brother died in a place that looked like this. IED. Instant. Nothing anyone could do. Rachel's voice stayed level despite the tightness in her throat. His best friend survived, spent 3 years believing he should have died instead. That survivor's guilt turned into something toxic, something that nearly killed me. The candidates shifted, not uncomfortable, engaged. This wasn't a lecture about tactics. This was a lesson about the cost of carrying war home. The Sullivan Protocol that was just implemented isn't about protecting you from tough training. SEAL training is supposed to be tough. It's supposed to push you past where you think you can go. Rachel met Tor's eyes. But it's not supposed to break you because an instructor is using you to fight his own demons. She pulled up the protocol framework on screen. Psychological screening, anonymous reporting, peer review, all the mechanisms designed to catch problems early. This protocol exists because the system failed. Failed my brother's friend, failed me, failed every candidate who got hurt because we prioritized tradition over safety. Rachel's voice hardened. Your generation doesn't have to accept that failure. You can demand better. You can build better. You can be better. A hand went up in the third row. Male candidate named Patterson. Ma'am, some of the old guard say the protocol is making training soft, that we're coddling candidates who can't handle the pressure. How do you respond to that? Rachel smiled slightly. Good question. The kind that separated candidates who just absorbed information from candidates who actually thought about it. I respond by asking them to define soft. Is it soft to recognize PTSD as a real injury that needs treatment? Is it soft to create reporting mechanisms so candidates can speak up about legitimate safety concerns? She paused. Or is it soft to let toxic instructors destroy good candidates because we're too afraid to challenge authority? Patterson nodded, absorbing the answer. The old guard built the foundation we stand on. I respect that. But respect doesn't mean accepting everything they did without question. Every generation's job is to take what works and fix what doesn't. Rachel gestured to the candidates. You're the generation that will benefit from this protocol, but you're also the generation that will improve it, find its flaws, address its gaps, make it better than I could. After the lecture, Tors waited while other candidates filed out. That was powerful, ma'am. That was honest. Sometimes that's the same thing. Tors moved closer, lowering her voice. Ma'am, I've been thinking about what you said, about every generation improving the system. I want to help with that. How? I've been talking to some of the other female candidates, and some of the male candidates who have noticed things. We want to create a peer mentorship program, not official chain of command, just candidates helping candidates process the pressure. Rachel studied the young woman. 8 weeks ago, Tors had been uncertain, looking for someone to tell her she belonged. Now she was building structures to help others feel the same belonging. That's a good idea. Have you run it by Commander Morrison? Not yet. Wanted your input first. You built the Sullivan Protocol. Figure you'd know if peer mentorship fits within it or conflicts with it. It fits. Peer support is one of the strongest protective factors against stress injury. Rachel pulled out her phone. I'll send you the research. Build a proposal. Present it to Morrison. If he approves, I'll help you implement it. Tor's face showed something Rachel recognized. Not just gratitude, purpose. The thing that happened when someone realized they could build instead of just survive. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me, just make it work. That evening, Rachel found her father waiting in the parking lot outside the operations building. Thomas leaned against his car looking older and more relaxed than she'd seen him in years. Retirement suited him, or maybe it was just the absence of the weight he'd been carrying since Jake died. Thought you might want dinner. There's a decent Italian place in town. Quiet, good wine. Rachel hadn't planned on dinner, had planned on going back to her apartment and reviewing tomorrow's lecture notes, but the invitation came with subtext she recognized. Her father wanted to talk, actually talk, not the surface-level exchanges they'd been having for 3 years. Italian sounds good. The restaurant was exactly what Thomas had described. Small, quiet, the kind of place where conversations could happen without performance. They ordered pasta and wine and sat in comfortable silence until the food arrived. Anderson told me about your lecture today, Thomas said. Said 40 candidates gave you a standing ovation afterward. Anderson exaggerates. He doesn't, I know because I was there. Back of the room, wanted to see you teach. Thomas's expression softened. You were magnificent, honest, direct, the kind of teaching that changes people. Rachel felt her throat tighten. Compliments from her father were rare enough to carry weight. I just told them the truth. That's what made it magnificent, the truth without decoration, the truth that costs something to speak. Thomas set down his fork. Storm, I need to tell you something I should have said 3 years ago. Dad, we've already had the reconciliation conversation. This is different. Thomas took a breath like someone about to jump off a cliff. When your mother was dying, she made me promise something. She said when she was gone, I needed to make sure you and Jake knew love wasn't conditional on achievement, that my pride in you wasn't tied to your rank or your medals or your accomplishments. Rachel waited, sensing there was more. I failed that promise, made the SEAL Trident the price of admission to my approval, pushed both of you into service because it was the only way I knew how to show love. Thomas's voice cracked slightly. Your mother would be ashamed of me. Mom would forgive you, she always did. Maybe, but I need to forgive myself, and I need you to know something. Thomas met her eyes directly. I'm proud of you, not because you're a SEAL, not because you survived Helmand, not because you built a protocol that's changing the Navy. I'm proud of you because you're my daughter, period. No conditions, no requirements. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. Rachel felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I needed to hear that 3 years ago. I know, I'm sorry it took so long. Thomas reached across the table, covered her hand with his. But I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it. They finished dinner in the kind of silence that came after important truths got spoken. When they walked to their cars, Thomas pulled her into a hug, not the formal embrace of military officers, the real hug of a father who had finally figured out what his daughter needed. Love you, Storm. Love you too, Dad. The next morning brought rain. Not the light California drizzle, but real rain that turned the grinder into a slick obstacle course and made every evolution twice as difficult. Rachel stood under the covered observation area, watching candidates run their morning circuit in conditions that would have caused most training programs to postpone. Morrison stood beside her, rain drumming on the metal roof above them. "Weather like this separates the committed from the interested," he said. "The ones who keep pushing are the ones who'll make it through Bud S." Rachel watched Tors lead her team through a weighted carry, boots slipping on wet concrete but determination never wavering. The young woman had grown into a leader, not through volume or aggression, through example, through refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. "Tors is going to make it all the way," Rachel said. Agreed. She's got something most candidates take years to develop. She understands that SEAL operations aren't about individual heroics. They're about team integrity under impossible conditions. A figure appeared at the edge of the grinder. Even through the rain, Rachel recognized the posture. Daniel Cross, the man who had provided 8 months of recordings that helped build the case against Cole Brennan. Cross approached the covered area, rain soaking his uniform. He came to attention in front of Rachel. "Ma'am, request permission to speak." "Granted, petty officer." "I'm transferring to instructor training. Commander Morrison nominated me. Command approved." Cross's voice carried uncertainty. "I wanted to ask if you thought I was ready." Rachel studied the young man who had found courage when it mattered, who had chosen integrity over easy loyalty, who had provided evidence knowing it might end his own career. "Cross, what you did took more courage than most SEALs show in combat. You stood up when standing up had real cost. That's the foundation of good instruction. Whether you're ready depends on whether you can turn that courage into teaching." "How do I do that?" "You make candidates understand that doing the right thing matters even when the right thing is hard. You create space for them to speak up about problems. You model integrity in every interaction." Rachel paused. "And you never forget that your job is to build warriors, not break people." Cross absorbed this. "Yes, ma'am, I won't forget." After he left, Morrison pulled out his own phone and showed Rachel a message. "From SEAL Team 3. They want you to come speak to their new operators about combat stress and institutional reporting. Interested?" Rachel read the message, not a request, an invitation, the kind that recognized expertise and experience. "When?" "Next month. 3-day workshop. You'd work with their psych officer to deliver training on recognizing stress injury in yourself and teammates." This was bigger than teaching candidates. This was influencing the operational force. The SEALs who would deploy, fight, and carry home whatever trauma combat delivered. "I'm interested. Send me the details." Morrison smiled. "Your protocol is spreading, Commander. People are paying attention." People should have been paying attention 3 years ago. Would have saved a lot of pain. Maybe, but change doesn't happen until someone forces it. You forced it. Own that. At 1400 hours, Rachel returned to Conference Room C for another observation session. Dr. Chen was interviewing a female candidate named Martinez who had filed a report about inappropriate comments from a civilian contractor working on base. Through the observation window, Rachel watched Martinez describe the incidents with the clinical precision of someone who had documented everything. Dates, times, witnesses, exact quotes, the kind of evidence that made investigations simple and resolutions clear. "How did you know to document so thoroughly?" Chen asked. Martinez smiled slightly. "Commander Sullivan's lecture. She said the only way to fight toxic systems is with documentation. Anonymous reporting is good, but detailed anonymous reporting is better. After the interview, Chen joined Rachel again. Your lecture yesterday created a spike in reports. 15 new filings in 24 hours, all detailed, all credible, all documenting issues that would have stayed hidden 6 months ago. Is that good or bad? It's healthy. It means candidates trust the system enough to use it, and they're sophisticated enough to understand that reporting without evidence is just noise. Chen pulled up statistics. Before the Sullivan protocol, we averaged 2 reports per quarter. Since implementation, we're seeing 8 to 10 per month, but resolution time has dropped from 60 days to 15 because the reports are better, more specific, more actionable. Rachel studied the data. This was what institutional change looked like, not dramatic overnight transformation, incremental improvement that compounded over time. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, is the culture actually changing, or are we just better at managing the same problems? Chen considered the question with the thoughtfulness it deserved. Both. The problems haven't disappeared. Toxic instructors still exist. Bias still exists. But the culture is shifting toward making those things unacceptable instead of inevitable. That's progress. That evening, Rachel attended a ceremony she hadn't expected. The candidates had organized a memorial service for SEALs killed in action over the past decade. 20 names, 20 warriors who hadn't made it home. Jake's name was third on the list. Torres read his citation. Lieutenant Jake Sullivan, killed in action, Helmand Province, awarded the Bronze Star with valor for actions that saved 3 teammates' lives, remembered for courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to his brothers in arms. The candidates stood in formation as Torres placed a SEAL trident at the base of the memorial. One by one, other candidates added tridents until 20 of them lay in precise formation. A tradition, a remembrance, a promise that the fallen wouldn't be forgotten. After the ceremony, Torres approached Rachel. "Ma'am, we wanted you to know. The candidates voted. We're naming the peer mentorship program after your brother, the Sullivan Support Network, if that's okay with you." Rachel felt her composure crack, not from pain, from something bigger. The recognition that Jake's death was becoming legacy, that his name would be attached to something that helped people instead of just marking where he fell. "That's more than okay, that's perfect. He'd be proud of you, ma'am, what you built, how you fought, the changes you made. He'd probably tell me I overthought it and should have just punched Brennan." Torres smiled. Maybe, but he'd still be proud. Later that night, Rachel sat in her apartment reviewing lesson plans for the next day's lecture. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Commander Sullivan. The voice was familiar but changed, softer, less certain. "This is Sullivan." "It's Cole Brennan." Rachel's first instinct was to hang up. This conversation wasn't required, wasn't wanted, but curiosity overrode caution. "What do you want, Cole?" "I wanted you to know I'm 30 days clean, from the anger, from the blame, from using you as a target for my own failures." His voice carried weight that hadn't been there before, real weight, earned through hard work. "My therapist says making amends is part of recovery, but amends doesn't mean asking for forgiveness. It means acknowledging harm and committing to being different." "I'm listening." "I harmed you, nearly killed you, turned my pain into your injury because I couldn't face what I was carrying." Cole's breath was audible through the line. "I can't undo that, can't take back the ribs I broke or the fear I caused, but I can promise you it won't happen again, not to you, not to anyone." Rachel absorbed this. Apologies were cheap, promises were words, but the tone in Cole's voice suggested something deeper. actual change instead of performance. What happens now for you? I work at the VA, help other veterans navigate PTSD treatment, turn my breakdown into something useful. He paused. Your protocol saved my life, Rachel, forced me to get help before I destroyed myself completely, so I'm trying to pay that forward. Good, keep doing that. I will, and Rachel, Jake would be proud of you, what you built, who you became. I know I didn't see it while he was alive, but I see it now. The line went quiet, then dead. Cole had said what he needed to say and ended the call. No expectation of absolution, just acknowledgement and commitment. Rachel set down her phone and returned to her laptop. The lesson plan for tomorrow needed refinement. She was teaching combat psychology, the real kind, the kind that prepared SEALs for what waited after the shooting stopped and the silence began. Her email chimed, message from SEAL Team 3, confirming her workshop, requesting specific topics, particularly interested in her insights on institutional failure and cultural change. Rachel began typing a response, not just acceptance, a proposal. Expand the workshop from 3 days to 5. Include not just operators but support staff, medical, logistics, everyone who touched the SEAL community, because cultural change didn't happen in isolation. It happened when the whole system decided to be better. She worked until midnight, then later, the kind of productive exhaustion that came from purpose instead of obligation. When she finally stopped, the lesson plans were complete. The workshop proposal was sent. The calendar was full of opportunities to teach, mentor, and build the changes that would outlast her. Rachel stood and walked to her window. The city was quiet at this hour, just streetlights and the occasional car passing below. Somewhere out there, Jake was at peace, or at least that's what she chose to believe. And somewhere closer, Maya Torres was probably studying for tomorrow's exam, building the foundation that would carry her through Bud S and into the teams and eventually into leadership, where she'd make her own changes to the system. And somewhere in between, Rachel Sullivan was learning that legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about building something that continued after you were gone. She touched the window glass like she had 8 weeks ago, but this time, Jake's reflection didn't appear. Didn't need to. His presence was in the protocol bearing their family name, in the candidates who felt safe enough to report problems, in the culture slowly shifting toward something better. "Night, Jake," she whispered. "We did good work today. Tomorrow we'll do more." The city lights reflected in the glass, and for the first time in 3 years, Rachel looked at her own reflection without seeing the broken warrior who had crawled out of Helmand. She saw an instructor, a teacher, a builder of better systems. And that, she realized, was exactly what Jake would have wanted her to see. 18 months changed everything and nothing. The grinder still baked under California sun at 500 hours. Candidates still ran obstacle courses with the determination of people trying to prove something to themselves. Instructors still pushed them past comfortable into the territory where character got revealed. But the shape of those things had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Rachel stood at the graduation ceremony podium, watching 80 candidates prepare to receive their Bud S completion certificates. Not SEAL Tridents yet. That came after more training. But this moment marked passage from candidate to operator in training. The moment when the Navy officially recognized you had what it took to continue. Maya Torres stood in the front row wearing dress whites that carried the insignia of someone who had survived everything the program threw at her and come out stronger. 18 months since Rachel had first met the uncertain young woman who wasn't sure she belonged. 18 months of watching Torres transform from student to leader to the kind of operator who would define the next generation. Commander Morrison stood beside Rachel reviewing his notes for the ceremony address. The older instructor had aged well in the past year and a half. Less stress showed in his face now that the Sullivan protocol had taken root. Fewer crises, fewer candidates breaking under pressure that should have been managed better. The system worked now. Not perfectly, but better. "Ready for this?" Morrison asked quietly. "As ready as I'll ever be." Torres specifically requested you present her certificate. Said you taught her what it meant to refuse to quit. Rachel absorbed this. Teaching had always been about more than tactical skills or physical endurance. It was about showing people what they were capable of when they stopped limiting themselves based on other people's expectations. She taught herself, "I just didn't get in her way." "Humble as always, Commander." Morrison smiled slightly. "Your father's here, by the way, back row, trying not to be obvious about being proud." Rachel glanced toward the seating area. Thomas sat exactly where Morrison indicated, wearing civilian clothes but sitting with military posture. Their relationship had continued healing over the past 18 months. Weekly dinners, regular conversations, the slow rebuilding of connection that came from both people deciding the past mattered less than the present. The ceremony began with the national anthem, 80 voices singing together. Then Morrison's address about honor and commitment and the weight of the trident they would eventually earn. Standard remarks delivered with the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak them. Then it was Rachel's turn. She stepped to the podium and looked out at the candidates. 80 faces representing every demographic the military could offer. 32 women, 48 men, all of them survivors of a program designed to separate the committed from the interested. "My name is Commander Rachel Sullivan. Some of you know me as the instructor who built the protocol that changed how we handle training safety. Others know me as the SEAL who survived an assault from a fellow instructor and used that survival to force institutional change." The audience was silent, the kind of silence that meant people were listening with full attention. "I'm here to tell you something nobody told me when I completed Bud S. The training you just finished is the easy part. Real combat is harder, not because the enemy is tougher than any evolution you ran here, but because combat doesn't end when you get home. It follows you, lives in your head, shows up in moments when you think you've moved past it." Rachel paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The Sullivan Protocol exists because a decorated SEAL carried combat home and let it turn into violence. He nearly killed me, not because he was evil, because he was broken and nobody caught it early enough to fix it before it became catastrophic. She pulled up an image on the screen behind her. Not combat footage, not training images, just a simple graph showing psychological screening results over 18 months. The data told the story better than words could. Since the protocol implementation, this facility has identified 47 instructors and candidates showing early signs of combat stress injury. 47 people who got treatment before they hurt themselves or others. That's 47 potential tragedies prevented because we decided safety mattered more than tradition. The candidates absorbed this information. Some had experienced the screening personally. Others had watched friends get help that wouldn't have been available 2 years ago. "You're graduating into a SEAL community that's different from the one I joined 12 years ago. Better in some ways, still flawed in others. Your job is to keep making it better. Keep speaking up when something's wrong. Keep supporting teammates who are struggling. Keep refusing to let toxic behavior hide behind brotherhood." Rachel stepped back from the podium. "Congratulations on completing Bud S preparation. Now comes the real work." Morrison took over presenting certificates. Each candidate walked across the stage, received their documentation, shook hands with instructors. The ceremony moved with efficient precision until Tor's name was called. The young woman walked with the confidence of someone who had earned every step. She stopped in front of Rachel instead of Morrison. Protocol breach, but nobody corrected it. "Petty Officer Tors," Rachel said formally, "you completed this program with distinction. Top marks in physical conditioning, top marks in tactical evaluation, top marks in peer leadership assessments." Tors stood at attention, but her eyes showed emotion barely controlled. "You also built something that will outlast both of us. The Sullivan Support Network has become the model for peer mentorship across all SEAL training facilities. That's legacy, Tors, real legacy." Rachel extended the certificate. Tors accepted it with proper military bearing, then broke protocol completely by speaking. "Permission to say something, ma'am." Morrison looked like he might intervene, but Rachel nodded. "Granted." "You saved my life, Commander. Not during training, before I even got here. When I read about what happened to you and how you responded, it gave me permission to believe my own trauma didn't disqualify me from serving." Tor's voice carried across the silent ceremony space. "You taught me that being broken doesn't mean being finished. It means being ready to build something better." The audience erupted in applause, not polite ceremony applause, real recognition of something that mattered. Tors saluted. Rachel returned it. Then the young woman moved off stage and the ceremony continued. After the last certificate was presented and the candidates dismissed, Rachel found her father waiting near the memorial wall. Thomas looked older in the 18 months since their reconciliation. More gray hair, more lines around the eyes, but also more peaceful. The weight he'd been carrying since Jake's death had shifted from burden to memory. "That was something," Thomas said, Tor's speech, unplanned. "Completely. Morrison's probably writing her up for breaking protocol." "He won't. He's too smart to punish honesty." Thomas gestured toward the memorial wall where Jake's name remained inscribed. "Your brother would be proud of what you built here." "Would he? Or would he tell me I overcomplicated it and should have just focused on teaching?" "Both. Jake had a gift for being right in contradictory ways." Thomas's hand rested on the wall near Jake's name. "But mostly proud, because you took his death and turned it into something that protects people. That's what warriors do, not just fight, protect." They stood in silence for a moment. Father and daughter, both warriors in different ways, both carrying the same ghost but learning to carry it without being crushed. 5 years since Helmand. 5 years of learning to live with what couldn't be changed. "I'm retiring at the end of the year," Rachel said quietly. Thomas turned sharply. Why?" "Because I've been in the Navy for 12 years. Because my body can't handle combat deployments anymore. Because I want to teach at the university level instead of just military instruction." Rachel met his eyes. "And because the Sullivan Protocol doesn't need me anymore. It's bigger than one person now. That's how you know you built something real, when it continues without you." Thomas processed this. "What will you teach?" "Psychology, trauma, institutional change, how systems fail and how to fix them before the failure becomes catastrophic." Rachel smiled slightly. "Basically turning my own breakdown into curriculum." "Your mother would love that. She always said the best teachers were the ones who survived what they taught." "Did she survive what she taught?" "Your mother survived cancer for 6 years longer than any doctor predicted, then taught nursing students how to care for terminal patients with dignity instead of pity. So yes, she survived what she taught." Rachel hadn't known that detail. Hadn't known her mother had turned her own dying into lesson material for others. The parallel was uncomfortable and perfect at the same time. "I'll need to finish this training cycle first. Get Tor's class through their next phase. Make sure the protocol is fully embedded. Of course, but Storm, when you do retire, know that you're retiring with honor. You change the institution. That's rare. The afternoon brought a smaller ceremony. The formal dedication of the Sullivan Support Network headquarters, a building that had been repurposed from administrative offices into a space where candidates could seek peer support without going through chain of command. Anonymous if needed, documented if appropriate, safe always. Daniel Cross stood at the entrance in his new instructor uniform. The young man had completed training and been assigned back to this facility specifically to help run the support network. His personal experience with moral courage had made him the perfect choice. "Commander Sullivan," Cross saluted properly, "welcome to the network headquarters." Rachel returned the salute and entered. The space was nothing special architecturally, just offices and meeting rooms, but the atmosphere was different, comfortable instead of institutional. The kind of space where difficult conversations could happen without performance. Tours waited inside with 15 other candidates who had been selected as peer mentors. All of them had been through the program. All of them understood what it meant to struggle and survive. "Ma'am, we wanted to show you what we built," Tours said. She gestured to a wall covered in statistics. "Since the network launched 6 months ago, we've had 347 peer counseling sessions. Everything from homesickness to combat stress to questions about whether candidates belong here." Rachel studied the data. 347 conversations that might not have happened without this structure. 347 opportunities for candidates to get support before problems became crises. How many resulted in professional referrals? 62. Those candidates needed more than peer support. We connected them with Dr. Chen or other mental health professionals. Tours pulled up another chart. But the other 285, they just needed someone to listen, someone who understood, someone who wouldn't judge. Cross added context. The network prevented at least 12 potential dropouts, candidates who were ready to quit because they felt isolated or overwhelmed. Peer mentors talked them through it, helped them find resources, reminded them why they started. This was legacy, not the protocol with Rachel's family name on it. This, candidates helping candidates, the culture shifting from compete or die to support and succeed together. "You've built something important here," Rachel said. "More important than any tactical evolution or physical conditioning drill. You've built community." Tours smiled. "We learned from the best, ma'am. You showed us what it meant to fight for each other. Now we're passing that lesson forward." That evening, Rachel attended a different kind of ceremony. The VA hospital 3 miles from base was dedicating a new PTSD treatment wing. The funding had come from a Navy initiative sparked by the Sullivan Protocol's success. If screening prevented instructor violence, the logic went, treatment could prevent veteran suicide. Cole Brennan stood at the dedication ceremony looking healthier than Rachel had seen him in years. He'd put on weight, good weight, the kind that came from regular meals and reduced stress. His eyes were clearer, his posture more relaxed. The man who had nearly killed her 18 months ago had become someone she barely recognized. They hadn't spoken since the phone call 8 months ago. Hadn't needed to. Forgiveness wasn't about repeated conversations. It was about deciding the past didn't control the present. But when the ceremony ended, Cole approached. "Commander Sullivan." "Cole." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Two people whose lives had intersected in violence, now trying to find common ground in healing. "I work here now," Cole said. "Full-time. Counsel veterans dealing with PTSD. Help them navigate treatment. Make sure they don't make my mistakes." How many veterans have you helped? 32 in the past 6 months, most of them Iraq or Afghanistan, all of them carrying trauma they didn't know how to process. Cole's voice was steady. I tell them what I should have been told. That getting help isn't weakness. That carrying war home alone will destroy you. That asking for support is the bravest thing a warrior can do. Rachel nodded. This was redemption, not dramatic, not performed. Just steady work turning personal failure into help for others. Jake would approve, she said quietly. Cole's composure cracked slightly. You think so? I know so. He always said the measure of a man wasn't whether he fell. It was whether he got back up and helped others avoid the same fall. I miss him every day. Me too. They stood together in silence. Not friends, not enemies, just two people who had survived the same loss and found different ways to live with it. Commander, there's something I need to tell you. Cole's voice dropped. The day Jake died, in those 3 seconds I froze. He looked at me, made eye contact, and he smiled. Rachel felt her breath catch. What? He smiled, like he knew what was about to happen and accepted it, like he was okay with it because getting me out mattered more than getting himself out. Cole's hands trembled slightly. I've spent 18 months in therapy processing that, what it meant, why he did it. What did you conclude? That Jake understood something I didn't. That brotherhood means accepting sacrifice. That some things are worth dying for. Cole met her eyes. He died saving me, not because you were weak, because I was frozen, and he chose to move forward anyway. The truth settled between them, not comfortable but complete. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you for surviving long enough to hear it. Cole walked away. Rachel stood alone watching the VA hospital's new wing gleaming in the evening light. 40 beds, 40 spaces for veterans to get treatment that might save their lives, all because one instructor's assault had forced the institution to admit it had a problem. Legacy took strange shapes sometimes. The final ceremony happened 3 days later, not official, not publicized, just 20 people gathering at the memorial wall at sunset to add a new plaque. The plaque read, Lieutenant Jake Sullivan Memorial Award for Moral Courage, presented annually to the SEAL who demonstrates exceptional integrity by speaking truth in difficult circumstances. Maya Torres was the first recipient. Rachel stood beside her father as Morrison made the presentation. Torres accepted the plaque with the same composure she'd shown at graduation, but her eyes were wet. Petty Officer Torres, Morrison said formally, this award recognizes your creation of the Sullivan Support Network, your willingness to speak up about institutional failures, your commitment to making the SEAL community safer for everyone who serves in it. Torres held the plaque like it was sacred. I accept this honor in the name of everyone who refused to stay silent, everyone who chose integrity over easy loyalty, everyone who believed the community could be better. The small crowd applauded. Rachel felt Thomas's hand on her shoulder, solid, present, the kind of touch that said, I'm proud of you without needing words. After the ceremony, Rachel and Torres walked the perimeter of the grinder. The same path Rachel had walked 18 months ago when she returned from Helmand, when Cole Brennan was still an active instructor, and the Sullivan Protocol was just an idea, and Torres was just an uncertain candidate hoping she belonged. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Torres' voice was quiet. Anything. Do you ever regret it? Fighting back against Master Chief Brennan, you could have taken medical retirement, could have walked away. Let the system handle it without you. Rachel considered the question. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Jake died and Cole broke and I nearly died, and all of that pain was required before the institution paid attention. She paused. But I don't regret fighting, because fighting meant the next generation wouldn't have to. The next generation meaning me. You and everyone who comes after. The candidates in the Sullivan support network, the instructors being screened, the operators getting treatment at the VA. All of them benefit because someone fought when fighting was hard. TORS absorbed this. I'm putting in my application for SEAL Team 3. Deployment rotation starts in 6 months. Good, they need people who understand that strength isn't just physical, it's moral. It's choosing right over easy. Will you write my recommendation? Already did. Morrison submitted it last week. TORS stopped walking. You knew I'd apply. I knew you'd continue. You're not someone who stops at good enough. You push for excellent, Rachel smiled. That's why Jake's name is on your award. He was the same way. They completed the walk in comfortable silence. When they reached the operations building, TORS saluted properly. Thank you, Commander, for everything. Thank you for proving me right. About you, about the program, about what's possible when we stop limiting people based on assumptions. TORS held the salute a moment longer than required, then dropped it and walked toward the barracks. Rachel watched her go, watched the future of SEAL operations walk away with confidence and purpose, and the kind of determination that would reshape the community whether the old guard was ready or not. Thomas appeared beside Rachel. She's going to be something special. She already is. So are you. Rachel turned to her father. Dad, I need to tell you something about retirement, about what comes after. I'm listening. I'm scared. Scared of being a civilian. Scared of losing purpose. Scared that without the uniform, I'm just someone who survived trauma instead of someone who turned trauma into something meaningful. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight. Your mother said something to me before she died. She said the military gives you purpose, but it doesn't define your purpose. That the real test of a warrior is what they do after the fighting stops. He turned to face Rachel fully. Storm, you're not retiring from purpose. You're retiring from one expression of it to find another. That's not loss. That's evolution. What if I can't find another expression? Then you'll build one. Just like you built the protocol, just like TORS built the support network. The Sullivan family doesn't wait for permission. We build what needs building. Rachel felt something loosen in her chest, not the ribs, something deeper, the fear that had been living there since she decided to retire. I'm going to miss this. The grinder, the candidates, the daily purpose of teaching. Then don't stop teaching. Just change the classroom. Thomas gestured toward the base around them. This institution is better because you were here. The next institution will be better because you'll be there. That's what teachers do. They make things better by existing in spaces that need improvement. They walked to the parking lot together. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Rachel of fire. But this time, the fire felt cleansing instead of destructive. Dad, one more question. Shoot. Do you think Mom would be proud of what I built, how I fought? Thomas stopped walking, turned to face his daughter completely. Your mother would be proud of who you are, not what you accomplished, not what you built, just you, the person who refuses to quit, the person who turns pain into progress, the person who carries Jake's memory without being crushed by it. That's not really an answer. Yes, it is, because being proud of who you are is bigger than being proud of what you do. Your mother understood that. Took me until I lost her and Jake to learn it. But I learned it. Rachel nodded, accepting the truth of that. 6 months later, Rachel stood in a university classroom preparing for her first lecture as a civilian. Professor Rachel Sullivan. The title felt strange, wrong somehow, like wearing someone else's uniform. 30 students filled the seats. Graduate students studying organizational psychology, most of them veterans using GI Bill benefits, all of them looking at her with the expectation that came from reading her background before class started. My name is Professor Sullivan. I spent 12 years in the Navy as a SEAL. I survived combat. I survived assault from a fellow service member. And I survived the institutional failure that allowed that assault to happen. Rachel moved from behind the podium. Standing still felt like hiding. This course is about how systems fail and how to fix them. We'll study organizational psychology, institutional culture, the gap between policy and practice. She pulled up an image on the screen. The Sullivan Protocol, the document that had started as revenge and become reform. This protocol exists because I refuse to accept that assault was just part of military culture, because I documented, because I built evidence, because I forced the institution to choose between protecting an abuser and protecting the mission. The students leaned forward. This wasn't theoretical psychology. This was lived experience turned into actionable knowledge. Here's what I learned. Systems don't change because people ask nicely. They change because someone makes continued dysfunction more expensive than reform. They change because someone refuses to accept the cost of business as usual. Rachel paused. Your job in this course is to learn how to be that someone, in whatever organization you end up in whatever cause you choose to fight for. A hand went up in the back row. Student named Martinez, Marine Corps veteran based on his bearing. Professor, how do you fight a system without being destroyed by it? Good question. The kind that separated students who wanted easy answers from students who understood complexity. You don't, not completely. Fighting systems costs something, cost me my health, nearly cost my life, definitely cost relationships and opportunities. Rachel met Martinez's eyes. But here's the thing. Being destroyed by a fight and being damaged by a fight aren't the same thing. Damage can be survived. Damage can be integrated. Damage can become wisdom if you let it. She gestured to her chest, where titanium mesh still held her ribs together. I carry the evidence of my fight permanently, but I don't carry it as defeat. I carry it as proof that I survived something that should have killed me, and that survival means I can teach others how to survive their own fights. The class was silent, not uncomfortable, engaged, the kind of engagement that meant something had landed. After the lecture, Rachel walked across campus to the memorial garden where the university honored veteran students. A small plaque listed names of graduates who had died in service. Jake's name wasn't there. He hadn't attended this university, but Rachel visited anyway, found a bench, sat in the California sun that felt exactly the same as it had on the grinder. Her phone buzzed, message from Tours, photo of a SEAL trident freshly pinned to her uniform. Caption, made it. Thank you for showing me the way. Rachel smiled and typed back, you made it yourself. I just didn't get in your way. Proud of you. Another message arrived. This one from Cross, first candidate just graduated from my instructor class. She's already implementing peer mentorship at her new facility. The network is spreading. The pattern was clear. What Rachel had built was reproducing, growing, becoming something bigger than one person or one facility or one protocol. That was legacy, not your name on a document, your impact in the world continuing after you moved on. Rachel closed her eyes and let the sun warm her face. Somewhere Jake was at peace, or at least that's what she chose to believe. And somewhere in between memory and present, her brother's voice echoed. Storm, you did good. Now keep going." She opened her eyes and stood. The next class started in an hour. 30 more students who needed to learn how to fight systems that needed fighting. 30 more opportunities to turn her own breakdown into someone else's breakthrough. Rachel walked across campus with the measured pace of someone who had counted steps before and would count them again. But this time, the counting wasn't about managing pain. It was about appreciating distance traveled. From broken warrior to healing teacher to builder of systems that protected instead of damaged. The path ahead was uncertain. Civilian life was strange territory, but uncertainty was something Rachel had learned to navigate. You didn't need a map if you had purpose. You didn't need certainty if you had commitment. And you didn't need permission if you had the courage to build what needed building. She reached her office and found a package waiting. No return address. Inside, a sealed trident with a note in handwriting she recognized. "Commander Sullivan, this was Jake's from his coffin. I've carried it for 3 years, time to pass it forward. Use it however helps. Cole." Rachel held the trident, feeling the weight of it. Not heavy, just present. A reminder that some things endured beyond death. Brotherhood, legacy, the belief that what you built mattered more than how long you lived. She placed the trident on her desk beside the photo of her and Jake and their father. 3 generations of service. 3 people who had believed in something bigger than themselves. The office door opened. Martinez from her morning class stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Professor Sullivan, got a minute? I have questions about system reform and institutional resistance." Rachel gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I've got all the time you need. That's what teaching is, creating space for questions that matter." Martinez entered, sat, started talking about his own experience with organizational dysfunction. Rachel listened the way her best instructors had listened to her, with full attention, without judgment, with the understanding that sometimes people just needed permission to believe their concerns were valid. This was the work now, not running the grinder, not drilling candidates through obstacle courses, but creating space for the next generation to learn how to fight fights that needed fighting. As the sun set over the campus, Rachel thought about legacy. Real legacy. Not monuments or awards or protocols with your name on them. Legacy was tours wearing a trident. Legacy was Cross teaching new instructors. Legacy was 30 students learning to change systems from within. Legacy was Jake's voice, still guiding her, even though Jake had been gone for nearly 5 years. Legacy was knowing that, when you finally stopped fighting, the fight continued without you because you taught others how to carry it forward. Rachel looked at the trident on her desk, picked it up, felt the weight of everything it represented. Then she set it down and turned to Martinez. "All right, let's talk about institutional resistance, because the first step to overcoming it is understanding it, and understanding starts with questions. So ask." Martinez asked. Rachel answered. The conversation continued as darkness fell over the campus and lights came on in buildings where other students were learning other lessons. But in this office, the lesson was simple and profound. Control isn't silence, it's command of yourself first, then your mission, then your legacy. And legacy, Rachel had learned, was teaching others to command themselves. Everything else followed from there. Commander Sullivan's story reminds me why I started this channel. For 30 years, I've heard veterans say experience beats youth every time. She proved it, not with violence, but with discipline most young warriors haven't learned yet. What hit me hardest? She could have destroyed Brennan. Instead, she built a system that saves lives today. Question for you veterans out there. Have you seen institutional change like the Sullivan Protocol actually work? Or does the old guard always win? Drop your thoughts below. Your service stories matter. And if this one resonated, hit subscribe. We've got more missions worth remembering.